This is Janelle Camion, Program Assistant. We have a quorum, so we'll be exiting practice mode and going live. Anything you say from this point forward will be recorded.
Recording in progress.
Welcome everyone to the September 6th UAC meeting. We can start with a call to order. Starting to my right, Commissioner Phillips.
Present.
Commissioner Motter, present.
Greg Scharf, present.
President.
It's long, I forgot how to use it.
Oh, thank you. President.
Rachel Croft, present. And Chair Siegel, present. I don't believe we have any changes, additions to the agenda, so we'll move forward. Is there any public comment on an item not on the agenda?
This is Janelle Camion, Program Assistant. If anyone from the public would like to make an oral communication, please raise your hand or dial *9 on your phone. No hands raised.
Thank you. So we can move forward and approve the minutes from the July 5th meeting. Are there any comments on the minutes? Or motion to approve?
Second. Was yours a motion? Mine, I move to
I'll
approve.
move, or,
Okay.
no, I move.
Thank you.
I
And
second.
we can also go down for approval. Yes,
Yes.
I'll abstain because I wasn't at the meeting.
Oh, should I abstain? No, I'll vote yes.
Yes.
Great. So the minutes are approved as provided in the packet, and we will move on to the utility director report.
Thank you, Chair Siegel. Good evening, commissioners. Few items of interest. So we offered our electric vehicle discount campaign during the July with an extension through August in partnership with Cool the Earth. Through a program where we were able to give discounts for EVs for between $3,000 and $7,000 on selective EV models from Audi, BMW, Ford, Toyota. This was the second one, as I mentioned. We also had the first one in March. We did have 4 EVs purchased through this program. So Palo Alto residents were able to take advantage of these savings. Another thing is Q-Mart is a partner that launched a program with Palo Alto homeowners to receive free online estimates for local vetted contractors for EV charger installations. Online estimates will include permitted inspections, inspection costs, and then we're excited to work with them, understanding that they're bracing the public quite well, and we're hoping that we can get some level 1s and level 2 chargers into customers' homes a little easier. For the 8th year in a row, we're participating with SunShares, Solar and Battery Storage Group by program, building climate actions, as well as SunShares partners will promote and program which offers discount prices for 2 installations that have been vetted, selected through an RFP program. It starts September 1 and it goes all the way through November the 15th. Contracts have to be signed by December 15th of this year to be participants in that. Last Tuesday, August the 29th, we actually started our new OMS system. It's up and running. The only thing that we are still working out some bugs on is that we are not able to text out to the residents at this point. We're hoping to have that done by and tested by the end of this month. As probably all of you noticed, that we had a large outage this past Monday, about 1,300 customers. It was located in an area where it was a combination of overhead and underground. There were a couple of different things that happened. There was what we call a jumper wire that burnt in the open on the overhead side. That killed the whole circuit completely. We ended up having to fix that first to get energy back into the underground section. And then we found an underground switch that had a hole in the side of it. We don't know what the cause of it, why the switch went bad yet. The cables tested properly. We were able to get most of the customers up with the exception of about 24 customers by 7 o'clock. The outage started at about 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And then 24 customers were out unfortunately, until about 1:30 in the morning, the next morning. So we're still investigating why that switch went bad. We don't really understand why. It was underwater, but typically most of our underground transformers and also our switches are also underwater most of the time anyway. That's what they're made for. And the reason for that is even though that these switches and transformers mostly sit in a solid pad lid, it's not so much the rainwater that causes that, but it's just runoffs that we find. And then it travels down the inside of the conduits. So if you think about how the transformers and how the switches are connected, they're connected by wires that go underground, and then they're through a series to get to the next switch, then conduits in the box, continue down, and then come back up to another transformer switch. And the water actually goes through those conduits, and the lowest portions of the system, that's where it stops and it drains. There's no drain rock in the bottom of these boxes. These boxes are solid on the bottom. And there's no way of actually getting that water out unless there's a problem, and then we come about it, and then we have to end up pumping all that water out at that point. But it did take us some time to actually find that underground switch that went bad. Once we were able to do that, we were able to get it up and running. Unfortunately, though, it took us almost 24 hours to get the last customers back up and feasible. I did notice that just for my own, as we were walking through this, it seemed like to me that the outage map was a little bit better than what it had been in the past. It was a little bit more precise, and it was much easier to see as customers were getting turned back on and repowered as the area started to shrink. You were able to see that on the mapping area. So I think that that was a plus for customers. We also saw that less calls came in during this outage than we typically would have. Contributed that maybe because of the holiday. Most people might not have been home, but our communications were out about every hour and a half. We tried to give a little bit of an update. Some of it was residual from not knowing exactly, knowing that it was just a piece of equipment, but we hadn't found it yet. But we were working on that. I think that as we move forward, hopefully by October 1st, we'll actually have the texting in place so that the public will be able then to receive text messages that we've been collecting over the last 6 months, knowing that we were going to go in this direction, updating any kind of cell phones that are in the home itself. So phone numbers that we could collect with new numbers, we'll be able to contact those customers through texting. And then also through those texts, we'll also be giving updates through the mass, hopefully not large outages, but if there is outages that occur. So the goal was to get this up and running before the winter time. And I'm happy to say that it made that goal portion of it, that this new tool that we'll be able to offer and be able to communicate better to our customers is in place. Also too is that August 16th, There was an EV Expo at Stanford Hospital's main campus to educate staff in electric transportation. Approximately 350 attendants engaged with utility staff. There was a variety of EVs from Ford, Hyundai, Kia, Nissan, Tesla, Volkswagen were on the display. And the event had huge success for the hospital that hosted it, which they typically do for us. So that was a great outing. The other thing is that some events that are coming up tonight. Actually, there's an e-bike 101 webinar on technology and the different categories of e-bikes and the best practices of getting around safely. And then e-bike discount campaign starts tonight as well, September 6th, ends through the end of the month, where there'll be savings of up to $400 per bike, $99 on a direct discount, $37 for bike accessories, and $165 assembly waiver fee. And then there's also a complimentary $99 discount for bikes that after 3 months, they bring them back in, they'll get a tune-up for free on that portion of it. And then September 10th, several representatives from the utility program services and communications are planning a table at the annual Midtown Residential Associate Ice Cream Social that will be coming up. And then one last thing is on the 14th, we're participating with Bay Area Water Supply and Conservation, BACFA, to host an integrated pest management webinar about safe elimination of household pests without any kind of toxics, pesticides. And with that, that concludes my report. Questions?
Yeah, Director Batchel, I have a question on the outage. The lights were out on Embarcadero Road and maybe some other areas as well, but certainly on Embarcadero Road. And I happened to drive by there twice that day. And the first time it was just kind of chaotic. Fortunately, I think traffic was light. And the second time there was an accident and there were stop signs. And so I hope it wasn't the stop sign or the accident that then notified someone to put a stop sign. But I'm wondering, what is the process if there are intersections that are out to help drivers?
So when we notice that, we know that on the major thoroughfare portions of it, we'll contact PD. And then we also contact Public Works to actually get signs out so that they can put portable stop signs up in the intersections on the major thoroughfares. We will probably don't do it so much on the side street portions of it, but where they're Embarcadero, Rascadero, places that have tons of traffic. Yes, we contact PD and also Public Works to get them to bring out signs.
Can I ask a quick question about the e-bike discount?
Yep.
Where is that available?
That is available. I don't have that answer. I will get back to you though on that, where that's actually going to be held. I should have that, but I don't have that. I'll have it before the end of the night.
Thank you.
I want to make a comment on the outage. I was one of the customers. And although I'm happy that we're getting a better system, I just want to report that the current system worked in terms of, I called in to report it probably about 30 minutes after it happened. The system responded back to me that we've already had it reported, thanks, and so on. Do you want to call back? I said, yep. And as soon as the thing was fixed, I got a call back. So we still have, good redundancy there.
Yeah, I mean, the new system was in place for this past Monday. It went live actually on this past Tuesday on the 29th. That is one of the advantages with the new system, that if you do go through the tree and you ask for a response back at the end when it comes back up or your area comes back up, it will call you back and let you know the lights are back on.
I didn't know that was the new system.
Yeah,
That's great.
new system that we put in, like I said, started on the 29th, Tuesday, a week ago. Thanks for that feedback though.
I have a question about AMI and the outage. I'm wondering, in general, what happens when there's an outage to a neighborhood? I did read that AMI should help you identify where it is. So I guess I have a question. Was AMI in place in any of the neighborhoods where the outage occurred? And then secondly, if it does in the future, when everyone has AMI, what happens to the AMI meters when the electricity is out? Are they fully running? Are they out and you can see that?
So we don't have any AMI meters out there yet. We've had a supply chain issue that we're hoping to get some meters put in by the end of the year. But we won't even get close to what our goal was, that we wanted to do 500 meters on a test. We're not going to get even 500 meters. We're going to get about 250 meters on that. We're still going to go and identify the area that we had to test those meters. But it's going to be more than a test at this period of time. As we get them, we're just going to plug them in. And we know that right now there are some what we call ERTs that are on the gas meters and on the water meters that we have deployed. And we know that information, we're still running our meter readers to verify that those reads on those gas meters and those water meters are actually being collected. All the collectors were put in place probably beginning of the year at that point. So we're pretty sure that the electric meters, we've test benched meters are the ones that we're going to get. So once we get them, we're just going to deploy them at that point. It'll take a little bit of time to get to the commercial meters. That seems to be a bit longer of a timeline. So what ends up happening is that those meters actually go dead. But the thing is that we're able to ping those meters from dispatch, from our system operators standpoint, and we'll know which meters are live and which meters are not being responsive back to us. So then it takes and breaks that down to what blocks are actually being done. So we were able to then ping those meters. It should tell us a lot faster than actually going out and waiting for crews to arrive. We'll be able to ping those neighborhoods, knowing exactly where the streets are. And at the same time, we're going to be putting some type of ERT system on our transformers as well, so that we'll be able to then at that point, instead of waiting for someone to come by and pumping this vault out and taking the time to actually look at it, we'll be able to ping that and tell right away if that thing is dead or if it's actually still has power going to it.
Awesome. Okay. And thank you for that answer. And also I got mine like 2 weeks ago. So I don't know if we all did. I know it was
Well,
stated
yeah,
at one of these meetings that we would. So thank you for that. And
Yeah,
I
no.
look forward to the day that I can see the
Yeah.
data.
Yeah, like I said, there's a few out there, but like I said, there's no mass out there at this point, unfortunately.
Do you have an updated timeline on when the AMI might be 100% in Palo Alto? That seems like a pretty substantial delay from what we were hearing before.
So we're estimating that probably end of third quarter of 24 or 2024. Sorry, we're going into 24. So we think that we'll have all the residentials up and running at that period of time. But we don't have an estimate yet for the commercial side. And my preference is really, I'd rather have all the residential meters in first before I start launching out on the commercial accounts.
And the delay is the supply of meters. You just can't get the meters fast enough. It's not installing.
Yeah, we secured a contractor. We have the yard ready to go, and we just can't get the meters. And others that are launching around, that have actually launched after us, are still waiting for meters as well too. The demand is high. It's frustrating that it seems like they should be able to make enough meters to go, but we just can't get them from the manufacturer.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Great, thank you. Director Batcher, we'll move on to our first item of new business, which is an overview of drinking water quality. Are there any comments from the public?
So if
This
you're, oh, sorry.
This is Janelle Camion, Program Assistant. If anyone from the public would like to speak on item number 2, please raise your hand or dial *9 on your phone. No hands raised.
I was just going to mention that with this item is, most of you remember, this item had been sitting on our 12-month calendar for some time. I asked our Assistant Director, Matt Zuka, to take a hard look at this and bring a presentation. And tonight, we wanted to make sure that this was one of the items that we were going to put in this month's packet. So this is something that came off of the 12-month calendar. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Matt for his presentation.
Thank you. Give me a moment while I share my screen. There we go. Good evening, commissioners. My name is Matt Zuka. I'm the Assistant Director of Utilities, overseeing engineering and operations for water, gas, and wastewater. Tonight, as Dean mentioned, we're going to provide a sort of a high-level overview of drinking water quality and how we manage it at Palo Alto. One of the genesis of this meeting was also some comment and public feedback that was submitted to the UAC, I believe some time ago, requesting additional treatment of Palo Alto water. So after I go through some of the information on water quality and the regulations, I'll touch on sort of what that means to Palo Alto if we were to sort of undertake such an endeavor. So the agenda for tonight, just a brief history of drinking water treatment. History might be a little bit generous. It's really just sort of an overview of the approach and what's happened on the major items in terms of sort of, I would just say the reduction of risk, overview of the current water laws and regulations, talk a little bit about the source water quality, what are the common complaints that we get into the city, and I'll present some numbers on that. Again, the considerations for additional treatment and some of the future water quality challenges that we're anticipating and paying attention to currently. So this slide's got a lot of information on it, but the reason I put it together is drinking water treatment, at least in my mind, is something that has evolved over time as a couple of things have changed. One is as our understanding of science changes, and two is our technology changes and our ability to detect chemicals at lower and lower concentrations. We find something, we want to know what it does, and we think about it, and then it moves on. And that's kind of sort of been the history, I think, of this and a lot of other environmental fields. So drinking water treatment really from an overall sort of disinfection standpoint started well over 100 years ago with the advancement of germ theory. We realized that sewage and water and drinking water is not a good thing. They identified this in London, you know, in the 1850s, and we started adding chlorine to the water. Solved the problem of cholera and typhoid and waterborne diseases that had 30 to 50% mortality rates. Fast forward another 100 years or so, and the advancement of science, we're now able to detect chemicals. We realize that the chlorine is generating certain byproducts in our drinking water called disinfection byproducts, creative term. And the regulations evolved to address those. So in the late 70s, the interim DBP rule, we'll refer to those as DBPs, was promulgated, and that followed a succession of rules until the early 2000s, stage 1, stage 2, and others, that basically resulted in San Francisco converting over to a different type of disinfectant in the system that did not generate these DBPs as significantly, and it's called monochloramine. It's what we use today. That was, I think San Francisco finally converted in 2002. And since then, we've realized that monochloramine has certain consequences, if you will, as well, in that that and ozone in certain source waters, not ours, fortunately, but in certain source waters can lead to the formation of other chemicals. One of them, which is called NDMA, is also known to be carcinogenic. And that's resulted in other changes of treatment technology where they might be using UV light instead of monochloramine to try to mitigate for it. Overall, however, you know, the approach is really one where treatment really tries to preserve and protect public health. And with a secondary effort on certain elements like aesthetics of taste and odor, and hardness and that kind of thing. There are regulations around those, but the bulk of the regulations and what we do in this industry is focused around protecting human health. From a regulatory standpoint, this all starts from the not the Clean Water Act, the Safe Drinking Water Act, sorry, different end of the spectrum. And the regulations are promulgated federally through what we call rules, and that you can sort of lump them together by different contaminant types. So there's a whole cluster of rules around different chemicals. So arsenic rule, lead and copper rule, for example, the DBP rules that I mentioned earlier. Microbial contaminants, groundwater rule, surface water treatment rule, and the total coliform rule are the big ones. And then we also have the community right to know rules that address our obligations to communicate our water quality information to the public. I'll talk a little bit about the San Francisco regional water system and our source water quality, because it is quite unique from just an overall from a national standpoint. Many of you have probably seen this. This is a schematic of the regional system. On the left, we've got the San Francisco Bay Area and the peninsula, and on the very, very far right is the Hetch Hetchy watershed up in the Yosemite Valley. The way our water is conveyed to us is via gravity with no pumping. It was, built over about 100 years ago now. And San Francisco takes advantage of the pipeline system to generate electricity as well. And along the way does the treatment. So they will inject chemicals along the way. They'll use UV light and they'll disinfect. But one of the unique things about our water is it's not filtered. And I'll go into that in a little bit more detail. But San Francisco basically uses this entire system. There's no centralized treatment plant for the Hetch Hetchy water, if you will. There is the Tesla treatment facility where we actually do the UV treatment. But they take advantage of the pipeline itself as part of their treatment technique, if you will. From a volume standpoint, 85% of our water comes from Hetch Hetchy. The reservoir itself, it's high elevation, pristine granite watershed, snowmelt runoff. And that has allowed SFPUC to get what is called a filtration avoidance waiver, which allows them to serve that water as potable with disinfection, but without filtration. Normally, surface waters would require filtration as an additional step if they're not pure enough and they don't meet certain water quality standards. Only 5 agencies in the United States actually qualify based on the reference that I have for this waiver. So this is allowed under the surface water treatment rule. And again, it's only for pristine waters, and it's been in place since 1993. And essentially what it means, and essentially sort of the modifier here, that the water meets all applicable treated water criteria without using filtration. So they don't need it, with the exception of disinfection. But even then, prior to disinfection, it has to be clean enough. You have to meet certain bacteriological standards to even qualify for this waiver. So you couldn't take your average Delta water, for example, and have a chance at qualifying. The turbidity also has to be very low, less than 5 NTU. And then on top of that, they have to disinfect to achieve certain log removal for pathogens, different depending on whether it's like Giardia or viruses. In the rare event where San Francisco might exceed one of these, they can actually pull the water and treat at the Sonoma Valley Water Treatment Plant, which is located on that long pipeline that I mentioned. And so they do have the ability to treat some water, but they don't want to spend the money, if you will, when it's not required. The treatment schematics, if you will, this is sort of a process view of the same much longer pipeline that I showed you. Top is sort of the surface water treatment plants. There are a couple, one over in the East Bay. One is actually, if you're familiar with the Crystal Springs and San Andreas reservoirs, they'll pull that water out and they'll treat it up at Harry Tracy and San Bruno. Those go through what we call sort of your typical coagulation Floc-Sed process, where they are ultimately running this through a sand filter before it gets disinfection. They'll add some chemicals for pH and fluoride, and it gets delivered out into the system. The Hetchy water is a separate process, separate treatment. It's UV and free chlorine, and then they add the ammonia for the monochloramine, and they also do some pH control and fluoride addition. The primary point here too is that we currently receive blended water, and we don't know really what day of the week we're going to be getting maybe some surface water versus just pure Hetchy water. It depends on how San Francisco is operating the system. But it can be from either of those sources.
Quick question.
Yeah.
What is surface water? Where does that come from?
Thank you. So surface water is generally what we refer to as anything other than groundwater that we're treating to then make it potable. So Hetchy would be sort of still considered surface water, but because it has a filtration avoidance waiver, I was more referring to the fully treated surface water that doesn't qualify for the waiver. that requires the full treatment. So sorry if that was not clear.
And where does it come from?
Different watersheds. So some of it will be the local watershed up here in the San Andreas and Crystal Springs. Some of it will be other watersheds. There's a few reservoirs. Let me go back up to the other slide. There are other reservoirs in the system that San Francisco can pull out of what they call the local watersheds, and those all run through a surface water treatment plant. That accounts for around 15% of the total volume that San Francisco delivers in its regional system. So 85% of it's unfiltered, Hetchy water. The other 15 of it goes through a full-blown treatment system, and we get a blend of that, depending on what San Francisco and how they're operating the system. Like, for example, there was some work done on the Moccasin Tunnel. They had to shut it down, and we were, for a period of about 90 days, getting nothing but surface water. That tends to be when we get a lot of taste and odor complaints, which is I'll talk about in a little bit. But San Francisco does manage this system in a way to provide us with the reliability, but they're not always guaranteeing us the Hetchy water. So on the consumer right to know, we also have to annually produce a consumer confidence report. I just inserted 2021 here. We have most recently issued last year's as well. But this is required by federal and state regulations. We have to issue this annually to all of our customers. It's supposed to be a plain language explanation of our water sources and our water quality, provides the data on how we've compared to MCLs, whether we've had any exceedances, and lists all the contaminants, and the typical sources as well. It also, ours provides a whole lot of information about the San Francisco watershed and where our water comes from and that kind of thing. But ultimately, it's intended as a tool to communicate with our customers the quality of the water that we're providing. In terms of the common concerns that we receive in operations, this is the majority of them here, and I'll sort of go through them because they vary in terms of what might cause them. I'd say predominantly, other than taste and odor, which I'll talk about in a minute, dirty discolored water is the most significant complaint that we would get. And that can come from a bunch of different things. I know my own house has old galvanized pipe, and if I let it sit for a weekend and I open it up, it's going to come out brown. That's often a source of sort of discoloration. It can also happen on occasion if we're flushing mains. We might be stirring sediment and material up within the pipe, and then that goes into a home. If we have a main break and we're doing a repair, we generate sort of high flow scenarios that creates turbidity. I'd say that's probably other than taste and odor, that would be the main source of water quality complaints that we get. Milky cloudy water is one that we get kind of seasonally, usually indicates the presence of air bubbles in the system. When San Francisco operates their system, they can entrain air into it. And so by the time it gets agitated and dissolved, it comes here. You pour yourself a glass of water, it starts off milky, let it sit for a minute, and the bubbles all float to the top and it goes away. No issue, just entrained air, but at first blush, it looks a little strange and people will call in. We also white particles, not the cloudy, that can indicate a dip tube and a hot water heater has gone, just based upon the corrosion that would happen in a hot water heater. We'll get complaints about black particles. Usually if they're floating to the surface, the elastomers in a home can degrade, especially under the presence of the chloramine, the monochloramine that I talked about as the disinfectant, can over time wear down the elastomers. So we'll see black flecks, for example, maybe in a toilet because the elastomer, the toilet flap is broken down over time, or even in the faucet material might be breaking down the O-rings and that kind of thing. And then we do occasionally get calls around particles that have accumulated and that are coming out. Most of the time, that's going to either be maybe some sediment that was entrained as a result of it being an unfiltered system. It's possible that as part of a main break and a pipe repair, there might be some in there. It's also possible that homeowners at their own home did work on it. So there's all kinds of sources for this for these materials. This chart sort of presents the actual calls to our water operations team that we've reported to the state board between 2018 and 2023. And the blue, as you can see, which is taste and odor, is probably, along with color, those are the two predominant calls that we get. The taste and odor tends to be seasonal. It tends to be when San Francisco is making operational changes, or it also tends, like converting over to their filtered surface water plants, which just have a different taste than the Hetch Hetchy water. It also tends to happen when we get on the shoulder seasons, where you'll have the summer is ending and then all of a sudden the air temperature up in the Sierras is much colder. The reservoir surface water starts getting cool and the reservoir flips. It actually thermally unstratifies and it mixes. And all of a sudden we'll get taste and odor complaints for about a week. And that's just nothing more than the reservoir turning over. San Francisco lets us know. We kind of generally can track that coming down the system. It takes about 3 days for the water to come down. And yeah, and I know when I've worked on other cities in the peninsula, for example, on hot days, Harry Tracy will start moving water down south, and that's water treated from the Crystal Springs and San Andreas Reservoir, has a completely different taste than the Hetch Hetchy water. And people notice the change. It's not necessarily bad tasting. It's still snow melt runoff, but it is a change. We do not get turbidity and suspended solids calls frequently at all.
Sorry,
So when
can
we
I,
talk,
can I ask a quick question about the
Absolutely.
graph? So it's total monthly water calls, water quality calls for a period of 5 years.
correct. We don't get
Does
many.
that mean that in 5 years, in the month of January, only 7 people
7 people
called?
called.
So it was like 1 or 2 a year?
Yes, correct.
I see. What's the total number of calls?
Oh,
In that 5 years?
Someone was gonna ask. I don't know. I can get
I
that
can,
answer for
I'll
you.
spend a moment
No, I can get
adding
that
up the
answer. I can
bars.
get that answer.
Okay. So it's about a call a month,
We don't get many.
less than that. Okay.
Yeah. No, and that's why I put this chart in here. And they tend to be episodic in nature as well. We tend to kind of know what they're about, especially the taste and odor ones. For example, we know that we have certain pipelines that if we don't keep the water moving in them, they're really old. If we let that water sit, when we start flowing again, we're going to get taste and odor calls. So we'll go out and we'll flush and we'll do what we can operationally to try to avoid that. But that is one of the main things that our operators do is, I would say, manage some of the taste and odor issues, if you will. Yeah.
So this seems like a remarkably low number of calls to me, 48 over 5 years.
We have
Is-
remarkably good water.
We do, I agree with that. Is this actual phone calls, or are there other ways people contact that are not recorded?
There are
here,
definitely going to be,
such
like,
as-
I don't, for example, if an email comes into the UAC, it's not going to be on this. It would be what comes into our operations room. That is a number that we put out to the public that they're supposed to be contacting. So it's the formal mechanism, but there may be other ways that don't make it on here for sure.
But it's probably not significant.
It's probably not significant. Yeah,
Thank you.
absolutely. You're welcome.
So, so if the water sits in the pipes and it's, funny colored or it tastes different, or what exactly is the stuff that's coming out?
Well, that would vary depending upon what's causing the discoloration. So if it's, for example, at my house, if I'm turning the faucet on after a weekend of being away, it's the fact that I haven't gotten around to replacing the old galvanized pipes and the inside is rusted and I'm getting basically iron turning the water brown as it flushes out. If it is a result of let's say a fire flow, or we're flushing and it's stirred up sediment in the pipe material itself, depending upon the pipe that we have in the system, which could be unlined cast iron, could be lined cast iron, could be a bunch of different materials. That could be the source. It also could be biofilms that have, sort of people think water is sterile, but it's really not. We get rid of the pathogens. It's not pathogenogenic, but there are heterotrophic bacteria that do grow in there, and they will build films, and that can accumulate as well. So there's a bunch of different sources in the system that can contribute to that. And I think that's part of the point here too, is that there's almost no silver bullet for it, right? It can happen at the home, it can happen in the system, and we're also an unfiltered system. So generally we don't get discoloration coming in from the Hetchy water. San Francisco monitors that pretty well, but all of the pipe components that we use to deliver it can also help contribute to some of the discoloration.
Do any of those things have known health effects on people?
Not to my knowledge, no. I mean, they're certified materials for use in distributing the water. So we
Even the little white things you said that come out, or?
That comes out of that
said
would be
that
a
came out
metal.
of the
I
water,
wouldn't
yeah.
drink it. I mean, if you had white particles, I would maybe not. I don't know what it is specifically, but in general, in general, we don't use materials that are going to be, toxic to humans to drink in the system. Lead was banned, for example, in the 80s for that very reason. So trying to avoid that. And we monitor for the chemicals that are, at least from a regulatory standpoint, that are of concern.
We don't filter more than any other city, right? I mean, we get
No.
the same water that everyone else gets. We don't have any higher standards.
Absolutely.
And San Francisco just follows whatever the state and federal guidelines would be.
As does all the 26 Bosco agencies that get water from San Francisco. Exactly. So no, we don't do any more or less than the other agency. In fact, I would say from an overall standpoint, we're looking at other water sources and everything, just like other people are, and looking at water quality the same way that other agencies do.
Okay, thanks.
You bet.
I was wondering if somebody does see something in their water, I mean, it's not a lot of calls. Do we go out and test their water, or do we help people test their water to figure out the source of something that's within the house, for example?
Yeah, we'll definitely roll someone out to take a look. We will not typically, we aren't obligated by regulation to, and so be careful how I say this. We have had calls, for example, where someone sampled their tap and they found something, copper, for example. I'm just going to use this as an example. So we won't go into the house and test generally on a bunch of different parameters just because someone asked. We will, if there is a known concern, maybe test at the nearest hydrant. We'll see what we're providing. But we try to avoid going into the house because the homeowner has impact over that last little bit of the system that delivers the water. The only exception to that is that we're actually doing the lead and copper rule sampling. Those we do get 40 individual homeowners to assist us because the regulations in that case require us to do first draw 6 a.m. first thing in the morning after the pipes have been stagnant because we're trying to capture that first flush of water. That's the only exception I would say that we make to sampling in the home is that it is required under the lead and copper rule. But we do help. I mean, I would say that a couple of these have involved numerous staff hours trying to work with people, sort of educate them on what our responsibility is as a water purveyor, walk them through what the water quality data mean, and provide, some guidance. Sometimes we can't answer their questions to their satisfaction, but we've done everything that we can do or are certainly required to do under regulation.
Thanks.
I just wanted, go ahead.
Oh, I have another question. Can you explain the difference between turbidity and suspended solids?
Yes. Okay. So suspended solids is an actual analytical method, and there's an EPA method for it. There's a couple of different ways you can analyze for suspended solids, and what it's trying to measure is on a mass basis the mass of sediment that you have in a given volume of water. So it'd be in like milligrams per liter units. Turbidity is an optical measurement, and what you're doing is you're measuring the, I'm not sure if it's a reflectivity or the refraction of light through water. And so it's used in the industry as an indicator of suspended solids, but it is not itself a measurement of suspended solids. So a turbid water that has suspended solids would have higher turbidity. It's also possible that a discolored water would have higher turbidity with low suspended solids. Suspended solids is mass, right? And turbidity is optics. And so really turbidity is used, I would say, in the industry as an indicator because it can also be done real time. You can have optical instruments, whereas suspended solids is something where you have to collect a sample, you have to measure it, you have to filter it, dry it, weigh it, and it's a process. And the regulations are driven more, for water anyway, are driven more around turbidity than they are suspended solids. If you're in the wastewater business, for example, it would be suspended solids, but in the water business, it's more around turbidity.
That is super helpful. And I think you already answered my question, but so there was a chart earlier of regulations or measurements, and I noticed that what's turbidity is measured in NTU or something?
Oh gosh, nephelometric turbidity units.
I'll believe you on that one.
Yeah, no, don't.
But,
I'm not sure I got
the
it right.
reason why, because it feels like suspended solids is the more interesting thing to know, but the reason that we're measuring or the regulations require measurement of turbidity is just, it's easier.
I don't know that I have the specific reason, but I can just tell you that's the way it's been my entire career. Is turbidity is what it's used at treatment plants. It can be done real time in the process. I think it actually captures a different range of data as well. But yeah, we don't typically in the water business do suspended solids as a, certainly not as a compliance measure.
Got it. Thanks.
Yeah. So I'm going to talk a
Just
little
give me
bit.
one more question.
Oh, sure. No, sorry.
No, no, I
I'm
apologize.
not trying to move on. I'm just,
No, so I would actually have been very surprised if we didn't follow state and federal laws, right? I mean, I would expect us to. I'd be shocked if Palo Alto didn't do it. So my real question is there low-hanging fruit, or is there stuff that we could do to improve the taste or to improve the healthfulness of our water that wouldn't cost the city much? I mean, are there improvements that we could make?
right.
Or are we doing, like, there's nothing more you think we should ever do?
So if I can ask you to hold on to that question after I get to the next 5 slides, maybe, and maybe if
Sure.
I don't answer it, we can revisit it. Because that's exactly the intent of the next section is what does it mean to do this additional treatment? So first I want to sort of talk a little bit about the hydraulics and how our system is configured. So we get water from San Francisco via 2 pipelines, the Palo Alto pipeline, again, cleverly named, and then the Beta Vision pipeline number 3, and 5 different turnouts. The turnouts are shown on this, somewhat pixelated image with the blue triangles. And then that water is distributed into the system into what are ultimately 9 different pressure zones. So the zones are at different pressures based upon their elevation, sort of where the water comes in, and how we manage it within the system between tanks and pumps and that kind of thing. For example, in zone 1, which is probably roughly 80% of the demand, we're dealing at a much lower pressure than in zone 4 and zone 5, which has got the pressure coming in out of the hills from the tanks that are stored up there. So any additional treatment that we do, we have to then figure out how we're going to do this at 5 different locations. Or I guess conceivably, I mean, if we're going to take this on, or conceivably how we're going to centralize all this into 1 or fewer locations and do all the treatment there and then put it back in. So there's overall, just out of the gate, there's a hydraulic issue and a sort of a dispersed treatment issue that we would have to overcome. Currently, there's no regulatory driver for additional treatment. I think, I covered that. And obviously for us, I mean, one of these turnouts, for example, California turnout, which is kind of in the middle there, it's literally in the middle of the street below ground. So if I had to do additional treatment, I don't have the land. So we're talking about buying land and how do I build it and sort of the complexities associated with that. To try to put a stake in the sand on what this costs, we haven't done an analysis of this in great detail, but the US EPA does have a model. Again, it's a model, it's not a cost estimate that they use for the purposes of estimating the impact of any regulations that they pass, because their regulations are supposed to have a cost element to it. They can't just require us to go to 0 on everything when it's going to cost way too much money. So I pulled that up, and just using a relatively straightforward carbon filtration, I tried to pick a chemical that had about what I assumed would be a reasonable empty bed contact time, and set it up to treat our peak hour flow. So we don't, if our average flow is 10 million gallons a day, I have to worry about the demand on the hottest day at the hottest hour. And the model spits out that it's going to be around $9 million per location. That's an average. It might be more at some, less at others. And again, it's a model, but that total adds up to about $50 million. So I just wanted to kind of put a stake in the sand. If I'm going to put in a relatively simple filtration system, just pulling out a model from the US EPA, with the only change that I made, to be honest, in the model was I did change the property costs, because they assume $30,000 an acre, and I think it's a little more expensive than that in Palo Alto. That's the only tweak I made to the model. Everything else is sort of nationwide average costs. This is kind of the range that we're talking about. It's not 4 million, not 1 million, it's not 4 million. It's going to be substantial. And I would say it's going to deviate from here based upon what chemical we're going after. What are we trying to treat for?
That's what I had a question about. This model is, what is it solving for?
So I picked kind of it's not really, there are a couple of things. I picked GAC, granular activated carbon, for a couple of reasons. One is that some of the public comment that we've gotten, if we're just doing sort of sediment filtration, sorry, let me back up. To your point, it's only solving for sediment that's coming into our system. It's not solving for anything that might add from once the point the water gets into our system, into our pipes at the home or anything like that. So if we were to do treatment at our turnouts, there are still multiple sources in the system that could contribute, even biofilms, pipe materials and all that kind of thing that could contribute to color, suspended solids and that kind of stuff. So in this particular case, again, with the model, I picked GAC. GAC also has the benefit of it could act as sort of a removal of particles, but it would also absorb some organic compounds. The removal of the organics is what the free chlorine and the monochloramine reacts with to generate the disinfection byproducts that I talked about. So if you remove the organics, you might get fewer disinfection byproducts. It's a stake in the sand. Really the point of it was, it's not cheap, right? And it's not $1 million. It's probably somewhere around here. And then it would go up or down depending upon sort of the scope. We could decide that we didn't want to treat peak hour. We just wanted to treat max day and do something else for the peak hour. There are different permutations on this. But I wanted to sort of get a sense of like, we're talking real dollars. And if the commission asked me, where did I want to spend $50 million? It wouldn't be here. I have a lot of pipe that is going to be getting to the end of its useful life that I'm much more concerned about than this. So, Commissioner Phillips.
So I guess what I would take away from this is if we are going to do anything, it doesn't make sense to do it as Palo Alto. It makes sense to do it upstream. And I probably haven't modeled the financials there. I mean, again, I don't think there's anything we necessarily need to do, but I assume the land cost is less, not 5 entry points, but one much larger stream. And presumably we could find some other cities to go along or some other districts to go along with us in doing it. Is that a reasonable takeaway from this?
Yes, with the caveat on the last part that I think this would be something led by San Francisco, not sort of a coalition of cities. Although the coalition of cities with BOSQA, who is sort of our representative, could influence San Francisco down a certain path if we had the collective will to do that. But yes.
Is there a reason that San Francisco would object to it being done by some other cities?
Besides money and no regulatory driver, those would be the two main ones. Yeah. But
I mean, they could be a free rider potentially, right? They wouldn't, some cities could say, we need to do this for our constituents. San Francisco, well, we don't care. Is there a reason they would object if it doesn't cost them anything?
I would say that there probably are reasons that they would object, just because they don't, it's their system and they don't want to necessarily be directed. But I guess money can solve a lot of problems too. I would say that I would be surprised if they sat down and were agreeable to doing it, only because the industry tends to work off of regulation and driving on regulation, with the exception, I would say, of some of the aesthetic, even the aesthetic elements are driven by regulation. So yeah, it would be a tough sell. I can't think of an actual reason they'd say no, but I would be really surprised
So
if they said yes.
be thinking of reasons to say no.
Yeah.
Are you hearing are other BOSCA members interested in any of it? Are you hearing any?
No, I haven't. I think that the primary interest really right now is in water supply augmentation solutions. It's not, and the treatment focus that's going on right now is in how are we going to treat those other alternative water supplies. It's not in taking this one and adding layers of treatment onto it. So I'll get to that in a little bit too. And we certainly have some of those same evaluations going on within our One Water plan and everything else. So I do have a couple of slides on some of those alternative water supplies, but there is a lot of conversation on the treatment topic. A lot of it is going to be around what we used to call it reclaimed water. We now call it purified water. It sounds better. But the regulations are changing super fast on that. Well, let me get to that slide. I was going to cover that here in a second. Oh, yeah.
On the pressure zone slide, there's a number of additional wells. Are those historic wells or what are those?
Good question. Yeah, so we have 8 active wells that only one is permitted for continuous use. The rest are basically emergency standby.
Okay,
And when I say emergency standby, I mean the alternative is empty pipes.
right.
Because we don't have the ability to chloraminate. We only have the ability to disinfect and chlorinate.
Okay.
So we would not want to turn those things on, chlorinate, and inject that into a chloraminated system. Yeah. But we do have quite a large, I mean, I think we can generate 10 MGD out of just groundwater in an
Okay.
emergency.
Okay, so it's like earthquake
It's
resiliency.
earthquake level. Yeah, we are. I love how you guys are catching all the slides I'm going to cover here in a little bit.
That's all right.
But we do, as part of the One Water Plan, we're looking at how we're going to maybe incorporate groundwater into this along
Okay.
with IPR and DPR, and which is obviously sort of a groundwater element, IPR anyway.
Yep.
Because we'd be the concept
Doing
is we're
injection.
injecting it.
Great.
Um,
And then the one that is currently active, that you have a permit to run, are you running that at all or no?
We're just exercising it and
Okay.
trying to keep it active. It's actually currently has some operational issues. The pump froze.
Where's
no, we
that
just
water
keep it permitted.
going?
Well, right now, what we can do with that well, the benefit of it is, well, it doesn't, when we operate it just to test it, it goes to waste.
Yeah.
But that particular well, we don't have the ability to create chloramines there, so we
Yeah.
still have that constraint. But we can, we don't have to treat it any further because we can blend it right in a reservoir with Hetchy water, and
Okay.
we could immediately, or pretty quickly go to adding well water in.
Okay.
So we're keeping that one active in case we need it.
Okay.
We would figure out the ammonia addition at that point in time.
Okay.
But then any iron and manganese or taste and odor hopefully would be
Yeah.
attenuated by blending it with other water sources.
Okay, and the water quality from those wells is pretty good or?
It's pretty good.
Okay,
I mean, compared to Hetchy water, no.
No, but-
Yeah, but the only quality issues that we have is going to be iron and manganese, secondary MCL,
Yeah.
and TDS.
okay,
So we think we can, for most of these wells, especially the El Camino Park well, that one we can blend with Hetchy water, and the other ones are going to be where we might have to look for a blending solution, or we might have to look for a treatment solution, or.
so
people
you
might
don't have a lot of infiltrate, you're not getting a lot of like salinization from
Mm-mm.
bay infiltration?
In fact, Valley Water has done a good job over the last however many 10, 20, 30 years of the pumping overall has dropped, groundwater levels
Yeah.
have risen, yeah, so it's really sort of an emergency supply.
Okay.
It's definitely, we're keeping them active. We definitely want it. We're not in any interest in obviously getting rid of
Yeah,
it.
of course. you need them.
But it's also, people would call and maybe complain about Hetchy water until they taste our groundwater. And then they're going to wish they had the Hetchy water back.
One final question about the pressure zone
Yeah.
operation. Are you doing any sort of thoughtful design of, and the energy, the time of use energy for that zone operation?
Yeah, we definitely, so the couple of things that we do is we do a lot of pumping. We try to do it at night to the extent that we can.
You're doing it at night, you said?
At night, well, there's also, I mean, we're also not wanting to pump into the system during peak demand time. So there's lower demand time at night.
Yeah, yeah.
What we tend to do is pump up at night, and then we'll bring down during the high demand period of day to turn the water quality over.
Yep.
So it's more driven by water quality preservation than it is by optimizing our energy consumption. Because our storage in the foothills contributes to our overall emergency storage, but we just can't keep it full because we have to, maintain
Yeah.
the water quality in the reservoirs.
Cool. Maybe we can talk a bit about that offline.
Geek out on that one, yeah. Okay.
you.
But there are some technologies that we've looked at that aren't quite there yet, where when you're breaking pressure from one zone to another, you put a little turbine in there
Yep.
and use it, and you
Do
start generating
recovery.
power. It may have evolved. Last time I looked at it, you need a big pipe, and we're not there.
Yeah.
So.
Cool.
Is that it?
Thank you.
All right, no problem. Okay, so moving on, when we do talk about treatment, though, sort of the continuous thought, point of use and point of entry is something that is actually kind of, I think, optimal for this kind of a situation, where if individuals do have concerns, either, personal aesthetic reasons or whatever, there are different ways that they can address it individually. So a point of entry system is a single system going into your home, treats all the water sources or all the water end uses. Typically, you wouldn't treat irrigation, although I guess you could. And then a point of use system is more at the actual end use, which could be like a filter below your sink or going into your fridge water source. And the benefits of these are that even though we're meeting all water quality regulations, you know, an individual homeowner might have different aesthetic preferences and might choose to do this differently. A point of entry system could be like a water softener as well. It doesn't have to be filtration. So first of all, I just want to say, obviously, the citywide provided tap water is safe. We're not saying that this is necessary, but if someone did have that desire, they could use it. We aren't allowed to use these as we're currently structured for actual compliance. We'd have to go through a whole set of hoops to demonstrate that this was our only way of complying with the water quality regulations. But again, the customers can do that. And it could be because they have old plumbing and they want to put a filter in so that what goes into their fridge and makes ice or whatever is higher quality. And the treatment technologies of this are all over the place as well, but similar to what is used in municipal water treatment. There's a website that has those. There are laws that say that if these treatment devices are making any kind of claims about specific performance and removal, they have to be certified by the state. And this website is where customers can go get information about these kind of devices. So future water quality challenges and sort of what we're worrying about and thinking about. We're right in the middle right now of what's called the UCMR 5. Unregulated contaminant monitoring rule is something under the Safe Drinking Water Act. And it includes, it's a process that the EPA has to follow to name unregulated contaminants. And this UCMR is the process that they use. Basically, they have to collect data on contaminants that they think might be present or suspected to be present in drinking water, but don't have health-based standards, and they have to evaluate whether they need to set those standards and do regulations. If you go back to how I said drinking water treatment has evolved, this is exactly how it evolved. We go look for things, does it need a regulation, yes or no? Regulation gets passed, everybody, the industry changes and moves. They publish this list, and we're literally, I think actually this week, sampling for our UCMR 5 program. Another thing that is sort of very sort of front topic in the water industry are PFAS, a sort of front topic in the environmental industry, if you will. And these are the forever chemicals. So the State Water Board has required in the past, under an order that they issued, certain water agencies that were higher at risk for PFAS to sample. San Francisco was not one of them, so they weren't required to sample under that order. San Francisco has sampled, I think, on 3 occasions, and all times the results were below the method detection limit at the time. These are chemicals that we're talking in the subpart per trillion level that people are worried about. So it's an exercise in just getting the right analytical method to find them in many cases. So UCMR sampling is going on right now. I think we're doing all of ours this week. And the EPA is starting to trickle out the results because PFAS is such a hot topic. The full data set is expected out in end of 2026. And this is one area where the EPA did move rather quickly for, in the water quality sphere anyway, and they do have MCLs for 6 compounds. Again, we don't expect this to be problematic for us, but it's something we're paying attention to. Lead and copper is a rule that's been around for a long time, but we're in the middle of a lead and copper rule revisions. And what that requires is for the city to go and, back in 2018, we certified that all the pipes on our side of the meter did not contain, known to contain lead or be made of lead. This new revision and regulation requires us to go on the customer side of the meter and verify that the service line on their side of the meter is also not a lead service line. So with the number of services that we have, we're sort of estimating we got to get about 50, 60 done a day over the next year to keep this program up and get it done. Shouldn't be a problem. We've been working on it, but that's a big effort. If we find any, we then go through a whole process of notification to the customer. So far, none. The other part of this LCR revisions is that we're going to, in a year, have to start sampling schools, and we're going to have to do 20% of the identified schools every year for 5 years, and then on request. So there's going to be a lot of sampling that we're on the hook to do for these elementary schools and childcare facilities. And then that cycle starts, and that'll go on for 5 years. So we're going to, on this one, it's going to be fairly substantial, and we're anticipating potentially needing additional staff to do it. Groundwater.
Quick
yeah,
question,
Absolutely.
quick question about school testing. I guess twofold. Do you know if the Palo Alto schools are in the habit of doing their own testing, or will this represent like the first time school water has been tested?
It won't be the first time. I'm not sure if they're in the habit of doing it on their own. I think we participated, and I wasn't here at Palo Alto when the last round happened, but there has been previous testing done in the past.
Does it typically, does the responsibility typically fall on the water agency or on the school district?
It's the water agency.
Okay.
Yeah, and especially in this go around, it's the water agency. The thinking from the state, even though from my perspective, it's kind of an unfunded mandate, I don't have the resources to go do this. But the thinking from the state is that we're the experts in water systems. Now, the downside of this, I also don't know how they built their school. So the plumbing, as I've talked about on premise, is as substantial as any other contributor to this. And so we're going to have to spend a fair amount of time at each school trying to figure out the appropriate sampling technique to get representative data. I can't just go to any water fountain and assume it's representative of all the plumbing on a facility, for example. So it's going to be fairly involved. And I think the state considers the water purveyor the expert. The school is better at education than they are at providing water. And so that's where it fell.
And you might not know, but I'm curious, do you know why only elementary schools and childcare facilities? Why skip middle school and high schools?
So I believe, although I don't know this for a fact, but I will speculate that lead in particular tends to be a developmental issue for younger children rather than older children, but I'm not entirely certain. And lead overall is bad, but it's particularly bad for younger age children. I do believe secondary schools can request, it's just not a mandatory thing. So if the secondary schools did want it, we would still have to provide the testing, but we're not obligated to provide the testing.
Is copper bad?
Copper can be. It's not the same as lead, and I don't actually know the actual toxicity of it or the sort of toxic pathways, but it is a regulated metal, so there's definitely some risk. But we tend, with the water quality that we have and what San Francisco does to manage pH and that kind of thing, we've never had an issue with it. I would say copper also poses a risk to aquatic organisms because the discharge from the copper pipes go out to the bay and they're not removed by, the wastewater treatment plants.
I had a question too on the schools. It seemed to me that with the lead in the news in certain cities in the country, that, why wouldn't we test the elementary schools, not wait for 5 years to do that? Like, it feels to me like when I read this, upon request seems crazy, that why wouldn't we just do it, right? And do we have any results from like the last time so that we know that there was a baseline done at some point? And otherwise, it sounds like it's just never been done, right?
Yeah, and just to be clear, this is the regulatory requirement. This isn't necessarily our proposal. I think that there may be, the part of it's going to be dictated by how much cooperation we get from the schools in terms of the information we're going to need to do the assessments. What are the resources that I have to be able to dedicate to the evaluation and then doing the sampling as well. So I don't think we're not advocating that we do as little as possible by any stretch of the imagination, but this is sort of the regulatory requirement.
I guess, would it be possible to see the results from the schools?
Sure, they'll be public. It's all public information.
But I mean, how do we get it?
Well, it's going to be a year before I start. So 2025 is when we start sampling. So
no, but I thought this has been done before. Yeah.
Okay, I can make a note to see if I can find.
That's actually kind of what I was asking, is I think if we saw the results from prior scans, then, if it's nothing or super low.
To my knowledge, it's nothing. But like I said, I wasn't here at that point in time, and I would just have to go back and revisit whatever data was collected.
Okay, because then the every 5 years or 20% per year might just make perfect sense.
And I think the previous version was not as comprehensive as this new round of revisions. I just don't have the comparison off the top of my head. But let me see if I'll go back, and if I find any data, I will distribute them to the commission.
So I was here.
Oh, you were? Okay, good. Well, that's good. One of us was.
So back in 2018, as Matt just mentioned, the rules were not as stringent. So the only ask from Purveyor was to actually go to the meter set. So on our side of the meter, On the other side, it was up to the schools at that point if they wanted to test, and if they didn't want to test, there was no results. And that results was not shared with the city at all from the public schools themselves or private schools when they were doing that. So you won't be able to find any kind of result.
I knew
portions
we
of-
had to test, but I wasn't sure what the point was.
Right.
Yeah.
So that was just the inlet side.
I guess given that, thank you for that detail. I guess given that, I would, advocate for testing them more than once, 5 years later than this regulation goes in place. It seems like it would make sense to just do a run of the schools,
Mhm.
especially the elementary schools and the younger
Well, is it-
childcare facilities.
Isn't the elementary schools every year, are the ones that 20%? And then if a school pops in,
It-
five, right?
So it's been a while since I put this slide together. My recollection is that we're obligated to get 20% of them done a year,
Right,
but not every elementary school annually.
right,
Yeah.
right. So,
So, we have a specialist working on pulling the school list together, getting the names. Our first compliance deadline in this whole thing is getting through the 10,000 service lines and scratching all of them and making sure that those don't have lead. And then I think this is going to be the next phase of work. Right now we're earmarking, I mean, if we get done early and we have the resources, we're not also interested in waiting. We'll use the time to our advantage. Okay, so groundwater, again, emergencies only, iron and manganese. We do have some things that we'll have to worry about in the long term. Our one active well that we have permitted to run, we have other blending solutions, but we can typically treat for iron and manganese. Technology's been around for a long time. TDS is really a secondary MCL because it affects it's kind of a taste and odor and a general usability of it. TDS is total dissolved solids. And the dissolved solids can give water hardness, it gives it the minerality, it stains the wood from the sprinkler systems, and so it sort of affects the usability of it. If you're treating for TDS, it typically requires a reverse osmosis, which is a pretty high energy use type system, or blending, and it also has a waste stream, or blending with a higher quality water like a Hetchy water to sort of basically dilute, if you will, the solids. So we are, and the reason I talk about groundwater is this is something that's being evaluated in our One Water plan as a way to augment our supply, in particular during dry years. Yes.
Just a quick question on groundwater. So my understanding of what you said is the groundwater is potable, but only for emergency use.
Almost. So I would say that our groundwater is potable. It is currently only, we have some locations where we exceed the secondary MCL. It doesn't make it non-potable. It just means we're gonna have to do something about that in order to get the concentrations down. They're currently permitted wells. However, to turn them into long-term operation, we would have to address the iron and manganese. Like the state board isn't going to allow us to turn these things on and start pumping them into the system in the long term. Secondary MCLs sort of represent an unenforceable standard where you don't violate the secondary MCL, but they're not going to let you provide it as a water source for a long period of time. I'm not sure I'm explaining that very well. So I would say that they're currently right now not engineered to be running continuously because I have a different disinfection system on the wells that's not compatible with the disinfectant that I'm carrying from San Francisco. Right now, free chlorine is what I have on the wells. When I mix that with monochloramine, which is coming from Hetchy, the two disinfectants mix and generate di and trichloramines, just to get technical, and those are not as good a disinfectant and they smell like pool water. So we don't want to do that. I would say that's why it's sort of an empty pipe scenario. Right. I can turn these on in the event I have an empty pipe, and I can run them for some of these wells for a very short amount of time without doing additional treatment. But we would need to do additional treatment if we're going to put them into long-term use.
Right, but for emergency use.
For emergencies, it's available.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So it's super technical. Hopefully it's being clear.
Well, along that note, what is secondary MCLs?
Thank you. So MCL is a maximum contaminant limit, and primary MCL would be an enforceable limit. So for example, if we exceeded the concentration of any constituent that had a primary MCL, I'm just going to go with a bacteriological parameter like E. coli, for example. There's a primary MCL for E. coli, secondary MCL, and those are enforceable. You get fines. The state board can come in. Secondary MCLs are for parameters like TDS and others that are more for aesthetic reasons and concerns than anything else. They still put standards out there because they're concerned about serving water that doesn't meet minimum aesthetic quality, but they are not of a public health concern, if you will.
And I take it there's no way to dedicate the groundwater to non-potable uses that, segregate it and use it for industrial, commercial use, car wash, golf course watering sort of thing?
I mean, technically, there's nothing feasible, except I don't have a separate system to put
Right,
in it at
there's
the
no-
moment. Yeah, so it would be probably hyper-local uses. We do have some wells at parks and that kind of thing that could then maybe be plumbed separately to do local irrigation, but not on a large scale.
Thank you.
Yeah. We've only got a couple more slides. And I think this is the last one. So the other thing that we're working on, and San Francisco's working on this too, they are evaluating indirect potable reuse, direct potable reuse. The difference between these two, again, it takes purified water. Indirect is that there's a barrier. So typically we think of IPR, where you'll take purified water, you might inject it into the groundwater up gradient and pull it out from a groundwater well down gradient. It's a way of augmenting groundwater supplies. San Francisco is looking at taking purified water and pumping it up and over the hill into the San Andreas and Crystal Springs reservoirs, and then pulling out at Harry Tracy water treatment plant as a way of augmenting local supplies as well. That's called the PREP project, if you ever hear about it. The other thing that's kind of exciting in this industry is direct potable reuse. The state board actually has regulations out right now for public comment. The public comment period might be closing, but direct potable reuse is where you take purified water and you actually directly put it into the system or immediately upstream of your treatment system. I'll just say Australia's been doing it forever, and we have not come along as quickly. There's a certain yuck factor that we have not yet gotten over, I think, here. But the drought, I think, evolved that thinking substantially. And the state board does have regulations out right now to hopefully in the future allow that. Whatever happens on this front, obviously the water quality concerns are going to be substantial. Not that you've refrained so far from questions, but in case you had any.
So thank you.
Yeah.
This is fun. And I'm just wondering, we have heard as a commission that there's a One Water report coming. And I'm wondering where we sit in terms of like receiving that from Carollo and action on that report from your group.
Good question. Not my group.
Okay.
That is being led through the Resource Management Division and Carla Daly. My understanding is that report is going to be first half of next year, but we can provide more specificity on the schedule for that. I don't have that answer myself, but that's around the rough timing is my understanding.
Okay. And I think we are certainly evaluating several options, DPR being one. And I'm wondering, has if it's not in your team, are you thinking carefully, or are you engaged in that process, especially thinking about blending back into these systems and what the water quality implications would be of blending?
So right now, it's a sort of, I would say, a tag team effort between myself and RMD. So I'm over engineering and operations, and Carla Daly's acting AD over RMD. And Valley Water has a plant going in. We have an option for some as well. It hasn't quite yet gotten to the point where we're modeling it or looking at the water quality. We're sort of, we're at the molecules phase of, is it going to get built and how's it going to get built and all that kind of thing. But the fortunate part, I would say, is for the most part, we kind of know the general water quality of what we're going to be getting back. Just because we're also all familiar with the source water and we're providing the wastewater. But we haven't sat down and gone into the really technical, like, what treatment process are they doing? What are we getting back? What's the the sort of distribution within our system, who's going to get what source of water,
Yeah.
all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
All of those are going to be not only just the water quality elements, but the hydraulic elements
the
of it are
hydraulics.
going to be
right.
a big question that we have to ask ourselves.
That's right.
IPR is also on the table. That would involve pumping it up the hill and injecting, and then we would just have a groundwater issue, where we're pulling out groundwater. I mean, I anticipate that after the drought, these DPR regs are going to get promulgated. This will be our universe here in another year,
Yeah.
and then we'll just be figuring it out. But until those regulations get, adopted, it's a little bit early to start the detailed analysis for us, I think.
Yeah, I guess I would just proffer that the value of starting early is in public communication and outreach. Like
Yes.
you get a lot of questions just from the UAC.
Yeah.
The number of questions from the public is going to be
Yeah.
orders of magnitude higher. And yet, we've seen from rollouts both in San Jose, but in Orange County and elsewhere, that the value of starting early is
Early.
really high.
Yeah.
And so I think the time is now in starting to have the kind of outreach events that are happening in electric vehicles and in other areas to bring Palo Alto citizens along with this idea.
Yeah. I mean, Valley Water still has, for their purification plant, which is our most likely source, a lot of work ahead of them. So I think we still have decades.
Yeah.
I don't think that's a stretch before we start turning that spigot on. But there is definitely going to be some public outreach before we do, and certainly before we start designing it.
Yeah.
But yeah, point taken.
Hey, thank you. This has been a really great presentation and discussion. My question is around, my question is around microplastics. And I'm like, would that be a question about the unregulated contaminant monitoring rule? I'll let you answer that. It's been in the news. It's been in the news in the Sierra watershed, microplastics being found in Lake Tahoe and snow melt. I don't know about Hetch Hetchy specifically. Is the SFPUC keeping an eye on this? Is there any testing? Do we know if microplastics are an emerging issue for our water supply? And if they were, what is the method of getting rid of them?
Right. So I don't know. I'm not aware of, there's nothing in the UCMR 5 to target microplastics. It's a big effort, certainly in the Clean Water Act and in other types of discharges. I don't think it's quite, not discharges, laws. It hasn't gotten to drinking water, I would say probably yet, but it might. We do have a benefit that we're not exactly pulling Delta water out also and, treating that as a water source. Like if you're at East Bay Mud or other districts that are doing Delta water, that might have a larger source or a larger component and be more of a worry, but then they also filter their water. That might then remove any microplastics depending upon the technology they use. So I don't know that anybody sampled for it, to be honest. And I have not heard anything in the industry that's focusing on it at this point.
Given Commissioner Scharf's question earlier on about is there anything relatively inexpensive that Palo Alto could be doing to be ahead of the curve? If we set aside treatment, which you modeled out at a minimum of $50 million, is there testing that the city could be doing to just understand what we have? What is our situation in excess of what's required for us to understand?
Yeah, I mean, we can always test. The question when you test is always going to be, what are you going to do with the data that you get? And what is an acceptable or unacceptable level of what if you find something, right? There's no health standard associated with it. I don't know how I would act from a public health standpoint. Like if I find a non-technical term, if I find a millismidgen of something, what do I do with those data, right? Is that a millismidgen too much or too little or that kind of thing? So we tend in the industry not to go, we rely on EPA and the state board to sort of identify the concerns. And then as an industry, we act, because otherwise we're collecting data that we don't really have a lot of information to do with. And there's not necessarily even a public health goal that we can act on. Because back at the beginning of the presentation, all of this is driven off of public health. So that usually starts with an agency like OEHA saying, I don't know what that stands for, but occupational health, something or that, I think. They will set the health goals, and then the industry tries to figure out how am I going to actually achieve that, what's cost effective, and then the MCLs come out because the MCLs have a cost effectiveness component to it. The health goals don't. They just say it should be zero. So in the absence of a public health goal, I don't know what I'd do with those data. And that always is the catch-22 and trying to go sample for things when the industry and the science isn't there yet. And that doesn't really answer your question, but you know.
It kind of does, and yet it's an odd thing. I don't know, it seems like there would be utility in data for data's sake and to start laying down the historical record. And then when the state mandate came down, we would be able to know. It's like, well, it used to be back when we started gathering data before everybody else. It used to be at this level and now it's at this level, and to be able to capture a trend. I don't know, but you didn't provide a cost modeling of sampling and testing the way you did of potential treatment. So I don't know if this is like a ridiculous thing to suggest, or if it would be like, oh, while they're out there, you know, gathering samples, fill a few more jars and send them to the lab.
Yeah, and again, you know, I understand the intent. I guess I would say that we also would then want to think about, you know, the temporal distribution of those data, the spatial distribution. I mean, there's all kinds of things we could probably write a PhD on this, right? If we wanted to. And so generally with the funds that we have, we try to focus on complying with the regulations and doing the things that the EPA and the state board have said are sort of, again, protective of public health. I think that's what the regulations are intended to do. So we tend as an industry not to start going out and collecting data for the sake of data. Part of it is just managing public funds and what is the right data to go collect. We could have been also, you know, should we be sampling for other PFAS chemicals, or there's a whole range of things that we could be looking for. You know, we generally rely on the EPA to sort of set those priorities.
I have kind of somewhat related question, but just not regarding microplastics, but regarding fires that have become much more prevalent in the Sierras, and you know, fires destroying things in the Sierras that eventually could go into the runoff. So I'm wondering, are the types of things you might anticipate would be a byproduct of a fire or firefighting, are those things captured in the tests that we do?
I don't know whether I can say that everything is captured. I will say that we've actually had fires in the Yosemite Valley and seen effects on the turbidity in the water. And in fact, for a while there, we were seeing it creep up, and there was some concern, this was several years back, I think, that it might exceed 5, and what were we going to do? So we definitely will see, I think, in those situations, additional runoff, sort of additional sediment into the watershed. And we definitely also saw some taste and odor changes. I don't think anybody was saying that there was a public health concern associated with that. San Francisco continued, you know, to do all of their monitoring, adjusted their operations as best they could. But it's definitely something that San Francisco is aware of. That, you know, when they manage their watershed and when they're managing their sort of overall water supply portfolio, they're very cognizant of that, and they've actually had a fire in the watershed where it affected us. So I would say yes, that we're monitoring for everything that we in San Francisco know might be of concern. The primary one is going to be, in all honesty, taste and odor and turbidity, because I'm not aware of anything else that we would be worried about. Certainly nothing that would be of a public health nature.
Any other questions? Thank you for the really
Thank you.
illuminating presentation. We will move on to item 3 now, which is an overview of fiber and the fiber backbone. And we'll start with any public comments.
This is Janelle Camion, Program Assistant. If anyone from the public would like to speak on item number 3, please raise your hand or dial *9 on your phone. We have one member of the public who would like to speak on item number 3, on item 3, Mr. Herb Borak.
Thank you. When the council approved the amendment 4 with Magellan, the first task was to prepare a design for the extension of the fiber backbone and for the fiber to the premises network. And, previous information you have when deciding how much to do, when, told you how many fiber strands were in each of those segments and part of the network. As I understand it, that part of the first task that was due in July is done and available. It's just the other part of the task, the construction, which has been delayed because of combining it with the grid modernization. So it seems to me all the kinds of information that you have now should be publicly available because when this gets to council, they'll have to decide whatever contract they're being presented with allocates funding properly from the fiber fund and the utilities electric fund. And in addition, since the fiber to the premises combined with the dark fiber fund, and it's itself a business that needs to set pricing, you would need to see how that is split. So it seems to me by now we should be able to get copies of those two designs, including in terms of the fiber, what kinds of equipment in terms of input and output in passive optical network and the number of customers in fibers out. And the locations of all those nodes and those segments. And also separately for the customer premises equipment, how many people are connected to each contact point. In terms of the huts, based on what Google had done, it would seem to me for the number of potential customers that this size hut, as I recall from Google, were originally for 10,000 each. And then they expanded to 20,000, had bigger huts. And also we had a third hut originally on the western part of the city, such as in Barron Park, where there is a high demand and that's not covered and it's far away. And the two locations are of concern. One is at the Baylands, and we saw what happened when we had a plane hit some wires and knocked down the entire electrical system. And also in terms of potential earthquakes to have the Colorado station might not be a good place. In terms of this building, the council has been repeatedly told by staff that it's too dangerous to keep the police department in that wing because of it's a critical service and it might be immobilized during a major earthquake. So to place everything about the fiber project there doesn't make sense either. And we should have the current pull agreement with AT&T and also the one with the NCPA proposed. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other public comments?
No other public comments.
Yeah, no, I'll just go. So tonight that we wanted to bring back an update on where we are with our fiber project and talk a little bit about just grid modernization and how we're looking at combining these two projects. Dave Yen is here tonight with me, our strategic business manager, to kind of give an update on where we are and what some of our stumbling blocks are right this moment with this project. So we'll talk a little bit about that. With that, I'll turn it over to Dave.
Good evening, commissioners and council member. My name's Dave Yen, Utility Strategic Business Manager. I'll wait for the presentation. But as Dean mentioned, we will be giving an update on the fiber expansion project tonight. It has taken longer than we had anticipated to be in construction. We are performing our due diligence to prevent any major delays when construction does begin. And that's also given us a little more time to align the grid mod project with the fiber expansion project, which we'll talk more later in the presentation. Next slide, please. So this agenda will include a recap of the 3 major capital projects that council has approved. The first is the fiber backbone rebuild. The second is the fiber to the premise project, phase 1 of it. And the third one is the grid modernization for electrification. We're also going to give you an update on some of the obstacles or milestones that we have to achieve prior to construction, such as the alignment of the fiber expansion project with the grid mod, the CEQA initial study, since this is a citywide design, and also the joint pole coordination with AT&T. We have a 100+ year agreement with them that might need some amending. And then we'll also give you some updates on other activities we've been working on. So what has council approved so far? Back in December of 2022, council approved the phased approach to build fiber to the premise without any debt financing. The fiber reserves has accumulated about $34 million in reserves from dark fiber leasing, where we lease conduit and fiber strands. The businesses are responsible for lighting the equipment and managing their side of the network, and also finding their own ISP if required. Council approved building a new fiber backbone and allocating about $20 million to the first phase of fiber to the premise. In June of 2023, council approved the grid mod project for citywide electrification to support the city's sustainability and climate action plan goal of 80% carbon reduction by 2030 of 1990 levels. And in order to attain this 100% electrification, we need to rebuild the electric distribution system, which includes the transformers, some of the pole replacements, and also all the wires. So we must mitigate all this in order to prevent overloading of the network. Here are the 3 projects. So on top, it gives you the kind of the estimated cost of each of the projects. In the second row, it shows you the funding sources. So we'll start with the fiber backbone. This is the current backbone is about 25 years old, and there are segments that are congested where we're unable to add new dark fiber customers because there's no more fiber strands available. We sometimes also require multiple field visits to new customer connections or inquiries because we don't know what is out there or what is available. The new backbone is an investment for the city for the next 50+ years. It will serve utilities, public works, public safety, and other city departments and allow for future services. It will also provide additional security and reliability because it will be separated from the fiber to the premise network and the dark fiber network, which may be accessed by third-party contractors if we allow. The second project of fiber to the premise, as we can tell, reliable and high-speed internet could be considered as an essential utility service during the pandemic, as families were teleworking and remote learning for extended lengths of time. Video calls, telemedicine, and virtual events require reliable, high-speed, or high-bandwidth broadband, especially if they're occurring concurrently within a household. The city launched a broadband survey and a fiber deposit program in 2022. 3,600 customers responded to the survey, which is about 16% of those who we submitted or we've had emails of. And they'll also receive over 740 deposits showing interest in the city internet broadband. About 30% of the customers are dissatisfied with their current internet service. An additional 15% said they were neutral about what they have right now. We also discovered that 53% of the households have already cut the cord, meaning they only have streaming. They don't have subscribed to cable internet anymore or cable service anymore. So the top 3 reasons for switching, they said, was lower price, faster speed, and higher reliability. Based on the survey results, we project that we get up to a 40% take rate, whereas the break even to make this business sustainable is about 25 to 30%. And finally, the grid mod project. This is starting now. It's a multi-phase and multi-project. It takes about, I think we're estimating right now, 7 years. We will first focus on the aerial construction areas because they pass the most homes and they are faster to upgrade than the underground areas. The pilot neighborhood we designed for electrification is in the Leland Manor neighborhood, which encompasses Embarcadero, Lewis Road, Oregon Avenue, and Middlefield. This is the last area where we have to convert our distribution lines from 4 kV to 12 kV, which is why it's the pilot area. The original pilot consisted of about 80 poles in that area. It was a very small pilot, but now we want to align it with the GridMod project. We're going to expand it to like 1,400 poles. So it'll be a much bigger area for electrification. Next slide, please. For the past few months, staff and consultants have been having discussions on how to best align fiber expansion with GridMod. Given the delay in the fiber project due to CEQA, staff believe there's an opportunity to align construction of the first phase of fiber to the premise with GridMod to minimize community disruption. Otherwise, we may be entering a customer's backyard multiple times within a few months. First time doing make a ready pole for the fiber, and then maybe later coming down and replacing the pole for the power side. So we're trying to combine these together if possible. We are reaching out to construction firms to see if there are cost savings to this approach. So that we're still vetting right now. There will be some cost savings, but we just don't know what that magnitude may be. It could be a 1%, or it could go up to 15% potentially. However, we do know that there will be better project coordination and less community disruption if we can hire one company to upgrade both the power and the telecom together. In addition, internal staffing, such as construction manager, project manager, inspectors, and mappers, would be more manageable if we were to combine these projects, because we do not have the internal resources to run 3 large projects concurrently. In regards to CEQA, we are hiring Rincon consultants to perform the CEQA initial study for the full fiber to the premise design. Rincon has conducted numerous CEQA studies for the city of Palo Alto and throughout Santa Clara County. Based on the scope of the project, the city is anticipating either a negative declaration or a mitigated negative declaration for this project. The initial study will be an assessment of aerial and underground construction, the fiber hut, underground vaults, above ground cabinets, and customer connections. The CEQA timeline is expected to take about 30 months, including 1 month of public review and comments. And finally, the joint pole ownership with AT&T. Currently, 5,400 of our 6,000 poles are jointly owned with AT&T under a 1918 agreement. The city and AT&T have operated under this joint pole agreement for over a century to manage pole replacements through the pole intent process. With a GridMod and fiber expansion project, the city will be touching almost every pole. This will increase the volume of pole replacements from about 100 annually to about 600 over the next 3 to 4 years. And this existing pole intent process right now will not be suffice to handle the volume of poles we'll be having to replace. In addition, the fiber expansion project will also require moving or relocating some of the third-party equipment on the pole to accommodate the city's fiber attachments, because there might be an RCOM space. So there might be encroachings in some of those areas, so we will have to work with the third parties to have them move their equipment down or up, depending on what's needed. So we did send out a letter to AT&T, and we are waiting to hear back from them to have this discussion to figure out how to coordinate all these projects together and what kind of resources we'll both need. We've also, back to one slide. We've also explored the Northern California Joint Pole Association, which is a nonprofit organization that was established over 100 years ago and has about 50 members. It's to help them share the cost of the utility poles. It's a consortium of private telecommunication, cable TV, phone, and wireless companies, including AT&T, Comcast, Crown Castle, and Verizon. It also includes investor-owned utilities such as PG&E, and also some municipal agency, such as Alameda, Roseville, Gridley, and Lodi. So 6 of the 16 members of the Northern California Power Agency, the NCPA, are members of the NCJPA, which is the Northern California Joint Pole. We haven't been on the history yet, or research it, but we're thinking most of these agreements were set a long, long time ago. So we don't know what the next result is for why they signed up. But the city's main objective of joining the NCJPA is to streamline the poll intent process and the billing process, and also recover the fair costs of replacing the polls from AT&T. Based on our preliminary review of their operations handbook, it does not seem we will achieve either objective by joining the NCJPA. There are more administrative steps, and there's a longer lag time also for the poll intent process. Our current agreement with AT&T is they must respond with, or should respond within 10 days. Under the NCJPA, they have 45-day window to respond to a poll intent request. Also, regards to the costs, the NCJPA uses a shared cost or an average cost across all the members. What we're trying to achieve is a full recovery of the actual costs. So given those two, I don't think the city will be looking into the NCJPA. Instead, we'll be trying to amend our agreement with AT&T instead to coordinate better and also faster, which is all very long overdue. All right, some other activities we've been talking about is make poll ready engineering. So we've already done all the make poll ready for all the fiber. So I think we surveyed all 6,000 poles out there. So we have schematics and load analysis on all those poles. Now with the grid mod coming on, we will have to do a new poll assessment to add on the power portion of it. So we can leverage what we have existing, but it's just going to take additional time to add on the power portion of it. So we have a consultant that we are engaging with, and they think they could do all 1,400 polls probably within 6 months.
With part of that inspection, did we determine which poles have third parties who have encroached our space?
So we have pictures of all those polls. They're in the Magellan survey. So yes, we do have.
And do you know what number of poles that's an issue?
I think in the first phase that we're looking at, it's probably like 300 or so. Or not all one day says on encroachment. I'll say 300 needs relocating. So some could be that they just need to move it down a little bit, but because there's space available, but they're not necessarily encroaching on our space. But there are probably at least 20 to 50 maybe that are encroaching, I would guess. So then the next one's the fiber huts. I think we did talk about a little bit. We have it about Colorado. So that is to be the first fiber hut. So it's a prefabricated building. I know there was concerns about the floodplain. So we will be following all the public works guidelines and whatever is necessary. We're also joining, I think the Colorado Station is also upgrading their perimeter wall for security purposes. So we will combine that as well with the fiber hut and make sure it's not in the flood zone, or at least mitigate it from that. So. Yeah. So for the second one, originally we had thought of 2 other sites. One was at Hale Well. The other was near East Meadow, which is by this Little League field. So given the size and the vicinity, we decided to look elsewhere. And City Hall and Equinix, which is the Paul Exchange Center on Bryant, we thought was a better solution. They're more strategically located, and we were able to reduce the number of huts from 3 to 2. So we think that is a better option. So City Hall, I know there was some concerns about the seismic structure of the building, but I think on the study of the police side, there was a definition of what essential services building meant, and that was for fire station, police station, emergency operations center, California Highway Patrol Office, sheriff's office, or emergency communication dispatch center. So a data center or fiber hut doesn't really qualify under this definition of an emergency service building. So it might be actually structurally viable for a fiber hut or a data center. But we're still reviewing that with Public Works, and we're also seeing what is available at Equinix. So we are in discussions with them right now to see what space is available to lease, how much cabinet or tower space we can borrow or use. But I guess the biggest challenge over there is just trying to get the conduit into their building, since they're so congested already for other telecoms. I think the ask is to put in a 432 cable into that building. So we'll see if we can work something out with them. And regards to invitation for bid. So hopefully, once we get CEQA done, we will begin issuing the invitation for bid or RFP for the construction. And we'll hopefully be able to identify both the grid mod and the telecom work onto one RFP or IFB, just so we can see what kind of proposal we can get back. So there will be an option to do both, an option to do one or the other, and we'll see. And for staffing right now, we did get 4 new positions that were approved in the FY24 budget. We haven't hired for any of them yet per se. For the assistant director, our CIO Darren Numoto is kind of serving as an intern in that area just because he has that telecom experience. And the other 3 positions we have approved are the construction or outside plant manager, the sales and marketing manager, and also a senior network architect or engineer. And that's all I have. So I'll start taking questions.
Commissioner, question?
So I guess I was trying to get a sense of, this seems to have been going to make a fairly large delay in starting construction. That's sort of how it feels. Did I take that out wrong? When are we going to start construction?
Given if CEQA takes 6 months, so starting now, so March is when we'll finish CEQA, let's say, and then the construction bid probably go out another 3 months, and then evaluation another 3 months. Well, let's say a year from now is when construction could begin. Maybe 9 months to a year is what my guess would be. We could put out the construction when CEQA, as we're getting closer to CEQA being finalized, I guess. So.
If we did it in January, February time, put out the RFP, by the time that CEQA gets approved, we could go back to council with the winning contractor, I would think. So June? I would think by June.
Yeah, by
next year,
June, but I think
start
we're trying.
construction.
Possibly, yes.
So
9
possibly
months.
next June.
Yes.
Well, that's much shorter. I thought you had to do the newer poll agreements with AT&T. I thought you were going to combine, I guess I misunderstood. I thought you were going to combine, the grid modernization. You're going to have all that ready by June. You're going to do all of that at the same time. That's fantastic.
I mean, the thing is that, we were working on the design phase for the first phase. So the first phase of the grid mod was only going to be 10%. That was the first year.
Okay.
Well, we decided that let's move it to the full phase, and that's why we increased the size of the grid mod as well as the first phase of fiber. We don't know what those savings are. As Dave mentioned, it's 1 to 15%. But if we're going to go out there and replace a pole if we have to do it for fiber, but we don't make it tall enough, then we're going to go back out there and touch that pole again. Now, granted, you would think that when we touch it, we should think about, doing it the proper way. But there's going to be savings there because if we did it on the fiber side, it's 100% on the fiber. If we wait and combine it with the electric portion of it, we can take funds from the electric side as well as fiber, which will save us dollars in those aspects of it. So we think that the reason why also it just so happened that where this grid mod is going to convert this 4,000 volt system to a 12,000 volt system, which needs to be upgraded because of electrification, it just made sense to combine the two. And we think that the debate right now is from Magellan and staff is, do you pay a little bit more for having a higher level person that works on electric lines bring and put in the strand for the fiber? So on the aerial portion, we're going to have to run a piece of wire from pole to pole. And then that fiber gets put on there and there's a machine that goes along and loops that fiber onto that strand. So the question is it cheaper in the long run to have it done by the higher cost, or do we hire a telecom company to come back for the second time to go back in those backyard easements or even in the front easements? So those are some of the things that we're trying to work out. We think that even though it might be a little bit more money on the electric side, we think that there's probably some savings from the fiber standpoint because we're going to touch it at one time and electric will be on the cusp of paying for the upgrade portion of the poles. So, so that's why kind of the little bit longer. I think the other thing is that what we learned through this process, that we had no idea from a staff perspective that this was actually going to be a CEQA issue. We figured that we can go out and replace any kind of wire. We can go out and replace any transformer. We can go out and replace any kind of equipment out there today on our electric side. So we thought lashing up some fiber was not going to be a CEQA issue, but then we found out from our attorneys that it is under CEQA. So that put a huge delay in that timeframe. So then we had to go back to Magellan, find another consultant to help us file the right proper work that we can get the CEQA done. So that's the little bit of delay portion for CEQA to April.
Is there a CEQA issue with the grid modernization?
Because we're just replacing basically in kind, just larger. So a large, maybe a little bit larger of a transformer, but they're, the wire's already there. We're going to replace we'll replace the secondary to a little bit larger of a size wire as well. So there's no CEQA issue there at all.
Is there a possibility with this, once we get the bids, do you think there's any possibility that this could accelerate the grid modernization?
Yeah, I think with the current proposal, we are accelerating the first part. So instead of passing maybe 500 homes, we're going to be passing 6,000 homes. So that's what we're proposing right now, which is the first phase of fiber to the home.
I was kind of thinking about, I think the estimated completion date is like 2030, right?
Oh.
So the last neighborhoods would go in 2030, which were supposed to be all electric by 2030. So do you think there's any chance that through this process, we would be able to accelerate completion, I guess, of grid modernization?
I think there's a possibility of speeding it up because we'll have this consultant already on board doing all the make ready. So they will have that under the belt. So I think they could speed up the other pole make readies for the other aerial areas. So I think so, potentially, but no promises.
I think the only caveat to that portion of it is, not to play this broken record, but we're having very much difficulties trying to secure transformers. Transformers are out right now about 2 years. So we have orders in. We are working with some other companies that what we haven't used in the past to get transformers in. So I think it's going to be a supply issue. Wire itself for the cabling of the electric side shouldn't be that big of a problem for us, but it's going to be the switches and also the transformers as we need almost to double the amount of transformers that we have in the system today. So it might be a little bit of a delay, but I think though that we have set orders in last year. We have received some, and we have another shipment of another 125, 150 transformers coming in by the end of the year.
Sorry, okay, go ahead.
Okay.
Commissioner Metz, then you can.
Okay. Yeah. Well, it sounds like you're in the midst of very challenging infrastructure build out. Is there a parallel plan on the fiber side for generating revenue, to help pay for this?
Yeah, I think the plan is to, as we start building out fiber to the premise, we will start offering that ISP service. So, and then also we are in talks with some of our larger commercial customers who are asking for more fiber in their areas. Just right now, we don't have that available. So there are a couple of revenue sources.
So the expectation is that as soon as we get it built out, that we can.
Right, as soon as we start
sell the
building, we can start
capacity.
selling it. Yeah, we don't have to wait till full completion.
Right, okay, thanks.
I noticed it says we need to coordinate with AT&T. What exactly does that mean? So I have kind of a two-part question. And they're presumably a competitor with us in this, which presumably makes it difficult on the fiber side. And also when I was reading the summary, it was much more positive on the joining NCJPA. I'm not quite used to that acronym yet, whereas what you just presented seemed fairly negative. Was there new information in the interim?
Sure, I can do the latter first. For the NCJPA, before we wrote the report, we didn't get their handbook. So we had to submit some monies to receive that and review their documents. So since then, we have reviewed their 200-page handbook, which is a lot, very outdated, just so you know, too, as well. So after reviewing it, we didn't think it met our needs, and it would just even add more complications. Besides the two things I mentioned earlier, such as cost recovery and streamlining the administrative paperwork, we might also could lose control of the polls if we were to join this agency. So right now, the polls are jointly owned between us and AT&T for most part. So that's another risk that we didn't want to kind of enter, I guess. And then regarding the first question, what was, I forgot already.
What does it mean that we need to coordinate with
Sure.
AT&T? What do we need? What needs to be coordinated exactly?
So before with this agreement, we usually have or monthly or quarterly meetings with them. So what we can do is agree on resources, maybe shared resources that we both approve, that we can contract out with to do the work for both sides. So we don't have to keep passing it back and forth to each other. We just have to agree on the costs and who the contractors may be and what the operations would look like, what the standards are. Another thing we're looking at is also trying to get like a database that we can share together. So instead of doing mail, very poll intent, maybe there's a more efficient way of sharing that information so we get responses faster. So I think we just need to get them at the table and just start having these discussions. I think under the joint poll agreement, they should be at least complying with us or at least working with us. So that's what we're trying to do.
Sure. Did you have a question? Any other question? I had a couple of questions. One, actually, I did a little research into the NCJPA, and I'm actually relieved that we're going a different direction. So that was good news to me. On the construction where you were talking about, it might be more expensive to do the electrical upgrade and include the fiber. What I didn't hear in there at all was the disruption piece. And I actually think that's a pretty big deal. And so that should weigh in when we're evaluating this. I mean, money's certainly important, but to have to repeat everything twice is quite disruptive. And on that disruption note, it's come up in the past before where we have a very short construction day. And has there been any thought about whether we might want to find a way to expand it for this project, given the time constraints that some of my fellow commissioners have mentioned?
Yeah, I guess we could request for it when we do the, I don't know what phase we would do, but that's just for exemption from planning, I guess, during that time when we get permitting to see if we could expand the operation hours, construction hours.
It's possible that what we could do is we could maybe not be on the major thoroughfares, but all the onesie twosie streets, we could probably talk to planning about giving some type of exemption that we could stay out longer for that period of time. Because it's no different than if we had our own crews out there working in front of your homes on the streets. So that's a good idea. We'll ask about that.
In regards to the disruption, we are trying to get one company to do both. So they could do all the power first and then the telecom company come right afterwards and hang up all the wires and messengers to complete the task, probably within weeks or days or whatever, maybe, but they'll be coordinating closely together.
That's good. And then, okay, maybe I lost. Oh, I know what I was going to say. So maybe some of you have seen, I don't know, I got an email from Comcast where we can only be a Comcast customer. We don't, or anyway, AT&T doesn't really serve my area. And they announced that they're coming out with this new 10G with the goal to ultimately allow them to deliver multi-gigabit upload and download speeds for $60 a month. That's a goal, so they're marketing. So I found it a little interesting. I don't know if we're on the radar, but I think we are a little bit going to be chasing that for this whole project, and something we need to keep in mind.
I think with the architecture we're picking, I think it's called XG, something GPON. It allows us to actually toggle the speed anywhere from 1 gigabit to up to 10 gigabits, depending on the needs of the neighborhood or the business or whatever. So we have that flexibility to be built in.
No, and I appreciate that, and that's important, but I also think that what I worry about is if Comcast, and I imagine AT&T is also, they seem to be working to add fiber to more customers as they go forward, that we're losing our customer base as time goes on.
Understood.
Any other commissioner thoughts, feedback? Okay, go ahead.
This, in the conversation about the polls, this came to mind is for the undergrounded neighborhoods, and I apologize if this was in the packet. I don't recall if I saw it. What is the approach to, is there similar economies of scale of doing both the grid modernization and the fiber at the same time? Or is that a different story when you're underground?
Based on our initial discussion, it's going to be a different package or a different path. I think for the electric grid mod, I think their focus is all overhead in the beginning. And then for us on the fiber side, I think we want to do both underground and overhead if it's in the same neighborhood. So we will probably have to hire a separate underground construction firm to do that work, but it won't be tied with the grid mod, at least not as of right now.
Yeah, and it won't be in from a path standpoint because we don't really have to upgrade the infrastructure on the electric side in the underground areas. We can pull the wire, the secondary wire out of the conduits. And the wire that we're putting in is not that much larger than what's in there today. So we'll end up pulling and utilizing the conduit on the electric side, but we're going to have to trench or we're going to have to bore the streets for the fiber side.
Well, thank you for the update. Much appreciated. And we'll take a 15-minute break now before we turn to SCAP. So let's see, back at, I'll give you 8:23. back on.
This is Tabitha Boatright with the Utilities Management Analyst. I have a response to Commissioner Motter's question regarding the One Water Plan. There has been delays with the vendor. So at the moment, staff is working closely with them to modify those delays. We are anticipating at the moment, early 2024, that we will have a return response. However, this fall, there will be multiple stakeholder engagement meetings that will be posted on the website and announced. So it is moving forward. It's just, we have slight delays with the vendor, so.
Thank you. And before we start the presentation, do we have any public comment on item 4, the overview of the SCAP?
This is Janelle Camion, Program Assistant. If anyone from the public would like to speak on item number 4, please raise your hand or dial *9 on your phone. No hands raised.
All right. Good evening, Commissioners. It's nice to see you in person. My name is Jonathan Abenshine. I'm an Assistant Director with the Utilities Department, and my main focus for the last year and a half has been on leading the cross-departmental climate action implementation team. I'm here to talk to you tonight about the Reliability and Resiliency Strategic Plan guidelines, and I'm also provided an overview of the Sustainability and Climate Action Plan in this report as well, some background, and I'm happy to answer questions on that as well. So before we jump into the plan itself, I want to provide you a little bit of context on why this item is with you tonight. So this item is connected to the Sustainability and Climate Action Plan. In spring of 2020, the council asked staff to provide an update to the SCAP with the priority of trying to achieve the 80/30 goals. And in April 2021, when council received its first look at the impact analysis, it established an SCAP committee to provide oversight for SCAP adoption and implementation. And through 2021, 2022, and continuing into this year, the committee, along with a group of stakeholders called the Working Group, and along with some additional stakeholders called the Working Group Teams, focused on a few things. They focused on developing the SCAP goals and key actions, and getting the SCAP itself and a work plan prepared for adoption. That was adopted on June 6th. And they also focused on early implementation activities, particularly the Advanced Heat Pump Water Heater Pilot Program. Now, with the SCAP committee, which had 3 council members on it, the involvement of the regular city boards and commissions was a regular important topic of discussion. Last year, the UAC had a joint study session with council, I believe it was March 7th, where there was general support for 2 things. First off, having the UAC providing oversight and receiving updates on grid modernization and other infrastructure topics, and then also agreeing to include 1 UAC member on each of the 3 working group teams. And those were Commissioners Bowie, Metz, and Scharf. In that discussion, the reliability and resiliency topic was a little bit of a gray area. In August of 2021, council had actually assigned reliability and resiliency specifically to the SCAP committee, and it wasn't clear what the role of the UAC would be. The SCAP committee included a reliability so when we included a reliability and resiliency strategic plan in the 2023 through 2025 SCAP work plan, just to sort of bound this topic and give it an avenue for actually making progress. And again, that work plan was also adopted on June 6th. Right around that time, we talked with the SCAP committee and we confirmed that the UAC could be the primary body focused on implementing this work item. And so that's why I'm here with you tonight. Now, when the 2023 through 2025 work plan was adopted, council also adopted a set of policy guidelines for the plan. So, and that's included in your staff report. And so we do actually have some policy guidance from council on this effort. The policy guidelines include some high-level objectives, and they also include a list of topics to investigate. And we've developed, what we have for you tonight is an outline of a work plan to implement those guidelines. And we're looking for feedback on that from you tonight. And I apologize, I'm going to keep up with the slides here. The work plan includes 4 tasks that staff can work on somewhat independently. Those are summarized in the staff report, and I won't go into too much detail on them, but at a high level, the first task is essentially a summarization effort. Staff is already involved in a number of efforts to improve system reliability, outage response, and also to build capacity to manage future electrification. So the Reliability and Resiliency Strategic Plan will summarize these topics and give the UAC a chance to weigh in on any gaps they see. And we're planning to come back to you with an update later this year in December on this topic. Second task is related to distributed energy resources. So engineering is doing a study of the impacts and benefits of these resources. And that includes solar, battery to grid, battery storage, self-forming grids, microgrids, as well as load management and control technologies and advanced grid automation and protection. And they want to look at how these can be effectively integrated. So we're aiming to get something back to you on in December on this as well. And the study includes both how to mitigate the impacts, so impacts such as the voltage impacts of high penetrations of solar panels, as well as evaluations of potential benefits, such as whether flexible loads could be used or other strategies could be used to minimize the need for distribution system upgrades. The third topic is resiliency, customer and neighborhood resiliency. And the goal here is, so we've had a lot of interesting proposals and lots of new technologies that we think could potentially be used to provide higher levels of reliability and resiliency than we provide baseline as a utility. But implementing and analyzing all these projects requires resources. And so the goal of this task is to inventory the potential projects we might take a look at, do some very preliminary characterization of what these projects might be, and then estimate the resource needs, both staffing and non-salary, to follow up on those. And then we'd be looking for policy recommendations, both from this commission and from the council on what, if anything, to move forward with. The fourth topic is about efficient electrification. And the focus here is on strategies, things like strategies and technologies, things like smart panels, circuit pausers, and other efficient electrification strategies that can be used to minimize the impact of new electrification on the grid. And this is an implementation activity. We know that we need to do this. It is complicated. We have a lot of conversations we need to have with our planning department, as well as utilities engineering on certain technologies, and we need to develop some good guidance. And we have had a lot of turnover in the last few months, the last 6 months in the resource management division, and frankly, haven't been able to move this forward as quickly as we would have liked. But we have filled a lot of positions recently, and we're looking to make some progress on this. And I think when we provide updates on this task 4, it will be to describe some of the things that we've been doing, provide some insight, and give the UAC an opportunity to give feedback, and we can adjust course based on that feedback. If it's helpful for the discussion tonight, I think tasks 1, 2, and 4 make a lot of sense to discuss together, since they are highly interrelated, and task 3 could be discussed separately if needed for time constraints. This is a very broad topic, broad set of topics. This slide shows the feedback that we're looking for from the UAC. So we're looking to make sure that the work plan is in line with the council policy guidelines, that we have the right topics included. And we have some sort of high-level descriptions in the work plan of the types of things we'll be looking at. And I think we'd like feedback from the UAC on whether these are comprehensive enough, and whether they cover the technologies that that the commission would expect to see included in this plan. And where clarifications are needed, or additions or subtractions, I think we'd really welcome that feedback. And then lastly, we'd love feedback on the timelines as well. So I'll stop there and turn it back over to you all. Thank you.
Commissioners, questions, comments? Go ahead, Commissioner Phelps.
Maybe it comes under the question of customer and neighborhood resiliency. And clearly the focus is on electrification, and appropriately so. That seems to have become sort of the direction that SCAP has gone. I'm still curious to know what, we're going to be 80 by 30. What is it going to look like for the 20 who are still on gas? What kind of rates do we see? Do we have issues with potential interruption there? And again, yes, electrification is obviously the goal, but what will it look like? What will the rates look like? Will there be a rate impact? If you come back and say, no, there's no significant rate impact of having a decrease in natural gas consumption at the residential level, I'll be fine. If it's going to double the rates for gas for the people, then I think we have something to worry about.
Yep. No, this is a really important topic. It's not the focus of the reliability and resiliency strategic plan, but so I think one of the values that we need to hold as we implement the SCAP is to make sure that people have affordable space and water heating for their home, regardless of whether they're able to electrify or not. And we need to provide resources for them to electrify. Part of meeting that commitment is making sure that we are thoughtful about the way that we manage the gas utility through this transition. We've done some preliminary analysis a few years back that I'd be happy to forward to you that highlighted that the more that we're able to trim or prune the less concentrated areas of the system, which is largely the single family neighborhoods, the more we're able to actually realize savings that allow us to maintain rates at a reasonable level without substantial increases compared to where they would be otherwise. On the other hand, if we maintain a broadly distributed system for very small amounts of gas, the picture changes. So because of those insights on the preliminary analysis, we added a work item to the SCAP, which we received some funding for in the FY 2024 budget, and which we're working on staffing right now, which is a gas infrastructure and financial transition plan. So we want to put a lot more meat on the bones of that preliminary analysis and make sure that we have some good strategies for making sure people receive affordable heating and water heating as we transition.
That's great. I mean, clearly, we want to avoid the dreaded death spiral of utility economics, where a lower base gets to have to bear the more capital expense and the costs go up for them accordingly. Thanks. So yes, I would like to see that.
Okay.
Yeah, if you're going to send that, just send it to all of us.
Yep.
Mr. Ebenstein, thank you very much. Very important topic, and then not such an easy one. I wanted to respond to the request for questions. Two questions. One, are the right topics included, additions, deletions, and so on? And then the other question, how UIC would like to be informed, at least my view of it. And I'd be happy to send this in writing, if you want.
I think it's helpful to have it in writing, but I'm more than happy to take comments and respond to comments here verbally as well.
It's a little detailed, but let me summarize. I think first, in terms of broad guidelines, it's really important that resilience address both everyday kind of business as usual speed bumps when there's an outage or, car drives into a pole or something, as well as true emergency situations, as we just heard in the earlier presentation, as CPAU does for water. So I think it's essential that resilience addresses both of those situations. And I think from the horrendous situation in Maui a few weeks ago, it shows how imperative it is for the electric utility to be on top of this in emergency situations. The second broad guideline, I think, which follows from the first, is I think it's important that we coordinate with Office of Emergency Services. I think, and that takes two forms. One is the anticipated scenarios and events that we, consider in our sort of spectrum of what constitutes an emergency, a design emergency, if you will. So I think it's really important that we, as CPAU, get on the same page as OES, and then also what our planned responses would be. And I think that's very important because right now, at least in past discussions in UAC, the design emergency has been something like, majority of customers would be repowered within 24 to 72 hours. And that's very different from what OES has said people need to anticipate, which is a week or two with no electricity and no water. So I think it's really important that both organizations get on the same page in terms of what the design emergency is and how we would deal with it. I think the second thing is to improve our process for preparation and assessment of local energy resources. This was talked about. Unfortunately, I missed the July meeting, but this was a big topic in the July meeting in terms of demand management, distributed energy resources, and so on. And I see that as a big problem because in the past, I think our analyses have concluded that those types of technologies don't pencil out. But I think if you really look in detail at the analyses, they don't pencil out because we didn't impute a value to the resilience of those technologies, right? We treated them just as, a standard economics without applying a value to having a fallback in an emergency. And I think also, and this was noted in the Jim Stack presentation in July, that we've tended to overvalue centralized solar. And that was one of his conclusions in his discussion in July. And I think that's also correct because it's simply, it provides RECs, but it doesn't provide energy when and where we need it, particularly in an emergency. And I think the third thing is in terms of neighborhood and community emergency center resilience. Yes, we need to do some to support emergency centers, but OES point of view is the first thing you want to do is keep people out of emergency centers. And so there has to be a way for people to survive an emergency in their homes without going to an emergency center because they'll be quickly overwhelmed. But again, it's just an illustration of one specific dimension of the gap between utility planning and emergency services planning. And then I just want to address briefly the other question, how UAC wants to be informed. And my suggestion would be that SCAP and reliability and resilience represent sufficiently important area, particularly with UAC as a lead commissioned on SCAP, that it would be important enough for UAC to have a subcommittee devoted to this. So those are my comments. I'd be happy to share them in more detail in writing. But I think you've picked a very important topic, and I hope we can follow up on it correctly.
Thank you.
Okay, I had some comments about, reviewing this document. I feel like I don't want to complain too much because it's still, it's the summary level, like an outline. And so some of the 2 and 4 seem like overlap. There's a lot of technology being assessed in 2 and then again being assessed in 4. But I don't want to double guess it because I feel like there's different stages or maybe different technologies in the different buckets. Can you address, is it the stage that you're you're doing the projects that makes them fall into two different projects versus, or two different tasks?
Yeah,
versus being
I think
combined?
I think they are interrelated in some ways. I think in some ways task 2 will, I think the phasing is a good instinct. The outcomes from task 2 will be helpful in the work that we do on task 4. It's not going to determine the course of what we do with task 4, but it is going to help us focus. I mean, I think we're generally in agreement that efficient electrification strategies will be helpful to the grid. The question is exactly how they end up impacting grid modernization one way or the other. And depending on the types of impacts or benefits that we find when we do the analysis in task 2, it'll inform how and where we want to focus the efficient electrification measures in task 4. We're going to want to look at and implement those measures regardless, I think, citywide, but where we prioritize could be affected by task 2. And there is work that we can do around evaluating technologies, with our permitting departments, for example, developing educational materials and programs that can proceed in parallel with that analysis in task 2. So that's why we wanted to split it up a little bit. I do see they are closely related, but they have a little bit of a different flavor in terms of implementation.
Thank you. And I guess one other comment I had here was for some of these tasks, the FTEs were really low. And yet there was some money associated. So like, for example, task 2 is 72,000 in consulting work and 0.1 FTE. Task 3 was 50 to 80,000 and, a quarter of an FTE. Task 4, similarly, relatively small amount of money and a quarter of an FTE. So are these typically, is the money component like an outside consultant? And then the FTE is managing the consultant and how?
I can give you a few examples and it's really different for each one. With task 2, that's a very clear formulation. We have some very experienced consultants doing this analysis. It doesn't take a huge amount of time to support them. On the other hand, task 4, there's going to be a lot of internal discussion and facilitation that needs to be done between different departments and divisions to make sure that we know what technologies we can offer to coordinate with communications teams on educational material, to coordinate with program operators, to make sure that they are also on the same page with us about what technologies we should be offering or what strategies we should be promoting. And that requires just a lot of day-to-day staff time. You can't really have a consultant do that. But a consultant, the non-salary costs are probably not just consulting there. It's a combination of consulting and then development of marketing materials and time from some of our program operators. And I think that'll be a smaller part of the effort here. With task 3, I think we're starting to do some work on that, and we may be able to do this with less consulting dollars. But these customer and neighborhood resiliency projects are a little bit cutting edge and complex, and it requires a lot of time from an internal staff member to sit down and work through how the sorts of impacts that these would have operationally on city operations, talking with the engineering division again, planning and development services. And really that is just to develop the scoping for these different projects. There's a lot of internal research, and we do expect the need for some consulting help. In task 1, this again is a summarization effort. We're expecting a minimal amount of staff time, but we did want to also just highlight the large amount of staff time that's being spent on the actual projects that we're going to summarize.
Yeah.
So that's an overview of what each of these FTE counts and budgets are going towards.
Okay, yeah, I was just a little bit surprised that it was not more actually.
Yeah.
And on task 3, just one more comment from me. Was, it says it's review existing literature. And I wonder if there is opportunity, I kind of brought this up on in another meeting, but should we be talking to some other municipalities? Can we see other places that we think have done, kind of are going where we want to go and do some comparisons?
And this was with respect to task 3 or task 4?
Task 3 just
Task 3.
mentioned,
Yeah,
review
absolutely.
existing literature,
Yeah,
so-
and that means looking at the case studies that have been done by other agencies, talking to other agencies about their programs.
Okay.
There are a lot of pilots out there that I think we can draw.
Okay, that was just my point,
insights
is that
from.
I would hope that we're actually talking to some people in addition to reviewing literature, so.
Good.
Okay, thank you.
Jonathan, thank you for coming back and covering this topic with us. I know that this was something that came up a couple of months ago. I also really appreciated your asking specific questions of the council. It really, I think, fostered a lot of good thinking ahead of time. So thank you so much for those 2 things. I don't have a lot to add. I've reviewed the plans and thought that generally, if they're phrased so broadly, that I think it's like, yes, like, we're enthusiastic. I, though, lack a little bit of history and context for exactly how the councils have engaged one another and what that path is going forward. And so I have most of my comments in the part about like exactly how can communication between SCAP and the UAC kind of continue productively. Maybe you have some thoughts on that you can share, as well as places where our council or our commission may have suggestions for other ways to make sure that communication is happening effectively.
Yeah, I think there is some discussion, there's some communication that needs to happen between the SCAP committee members and the commission. I think we had a pretty successful cadence last year when we had 3 different working group teams who were operating, and we had commissioners who were able to join those team meetings, and I believe we're bringing back updates. And we've been inviting the commissioners from those teams to instead of having individual working group team meetings this year, we've been having meetings of the working group as a whole and all of the team members. And we've had several of those meetings, invited the commissioners, and I know Commissioner Metz has been able to attend some of these. I don't think we've always been able to do them around everybody's schedule. And of course, Commissioner Bowie has dropped off the commission as well. So there's clearly a refresh that needs to be done. I know that, so Brad Eggleston is the executive team lead on the SCAP and the liaison with the SCAP committee. I know that he and Ed are working out how to have that conversation and how to proceed. So I don't have a good answer for you right now, but we're working on it.
I ask just one quick follow-up question, which is in terms of the set of people that serve on SCAP, how deep is their familiarity with the types of issues that come up in UAC meetings? And would there be some value in having, if given the very close interaction, certainly reporting back to the UAC I think is incredibly important, but the inverse may also be true. And just understanding whether, some sort of monthly report that comes at the start of each of these two respective meetings to make sure that we are all on the same page. I don't know, it struck me that there was maybe an opportunity for two-way communication in that respect.
Yeah, and I think that the two-way communication was able to happen when we had commissioner representatives on the teams. And I think that's something that we need to talk about. I can't speak to monthly reports as the avenue. I think I kind of have to defer to the SCAP committee on that. But yeah, I wish that I had more that I could bring to you tonight because I'm conscious of this as an issue and I've been bringing it up. Just to your specific question about the level of familiarity with commission topics, it's a varying level of experience, I think. So, but I do think that two-way communication, having commissioners involved with the SCAP committee has been helpful in the past, and I'll return with when I have something more that I can report out on, but I'll take those as comments and pass them on.
I guess I had a little bit of questions regarding the tasks themselves, and I was trying to figure out a good way to phrase this. So, like the first one under task 1 is addressing utility workforce issues. I guess I would ask why that's in there. We've been talking about linemen for 20 years. I mean, is there something in here that you're going to do differently? I mean, it's supposed to be through an MOU and bargaining and, and all of that. So I guess I'm asking, what value does it create to have this process try and address utility workforce issues? I mean, so I'll ask that first.
Yeah. So the items in task 1, we're not planning to address through this process, but they do impact reliability. So we want to be able to summarize so that information is included in the context of the entire plan, what we're doing on things like making sure we have a workforce that can respond to emergencies, and restore service quickly, making sure that we are investing in our infrastructure, making sure we're able to report out on outages when they occur, because these are the bread and butter reliability issues that are important to people when they think about electrification. And so I think leaving those out of this strategic plan would be a little bit of a glaring omission. We don't want to make changes necessarily to anything that we're doing, but it is one more moment that the UAC gets to provide some feedback on those efforts and ask questions.
So you're just going to identify this in the strategic plan, right? You're not going to offer solutions.
Correct. Or we'll summarize the solutions that we're already working on implementing.
Okay. I mean, that makes some sense. And then things like improving utility outage management system and communication protocol. I actually thought we were doing a good job on that. So I guess I would ask, what needs to be improved? I mean, is that what this is going to identify?
This may be summarizing the efforts that we've already engaged in to improve our outage management system. So there's going to be a mix in here.
So I guess that's where I'm sort of losing it a little bit, is it says addressing utility workforce issues, it says improving, as opposed to saying summarize utility workforce issues.
Gotcha.
Or, and I think especially, on, at least I, for one, when I see this, I'm expecting you to do something different than what you're going to do.
Got it. Well, I think we could work to make that clearer in the work plan and in the report. I'm happy to take that and make those modifications. We will send this to council as an informational, so we could probably make those changes before we even send it to council.
Okay, great, because I think that was confusing for me at least, of what this was going to be. I guess I'm a little confused on something. Are we, in the new technology, are we expecting more distributed energy? And by distributed, I mean rooftop solar, or what we're talking about, our electric vehicles putting, power back into the house?
Yes.
What do we really mean? And that's what you mean?
So yes to all those things. Let me get the let me get the list because it's helpful for me to be able to refer back to what I talked this over with our engineering manager just to make sure I wasn't talking about anything that was outside the bounds of this task 2 study, but distributed energy resources, the way they're defining it. And again, it's not a precise term, but we'll be looking at solar, battery storage, including battery to grid, and microgrids alongside load management and control technologies and advanced grid automation and protection.
So and this is where I guess I'm losing a little bit. All those sound great, right? And if we're just going to summarize all that, then it's really, I don't think it adds anything to the discussion, frankly. I mean, are we talking about so I guess where I come from a little bit is that the large solar farms that we, contract with, that provides cheap electricity. Distributed energy, as far as I can tell, is always super expensive. I've yet to see it not be. I mean, and so, it'd be one thing to say, for reliability, we want to put some distributed energy in. And also the rooftop solar doesn't seem to provide that because it doesn't seem to go, it goes off the grid when the grid falls down, right? So I guess I sometimes feel like we just use these words and we don't actually have a plan to where that gets us.
Sure.
And I mean, is the goal to say, hey, if the grid goes down, we're going to have some reliability because people are going to be able to plug their cars right back into the grid. And this is something we're going to achieve. Or is it, these are just like, we'd like to have this, this, and this. And this plan almost seems a little bit more like summarize that, which is fine. I just don't see it achieving anything then.
So I want to distinguish between a few things. The only summarization effort that we're going to do is on the items listed in task 1, because we don't want to change the course of those already established projects. Task 2 is an actual work item. There's a study in progress right now on distributed energy resources and how we integrate those into the grid. And then the assumption there is these things are coming and they're going to have some impacts that we need to mitigate. And they potentially have some grid benefits. We want to see whether there are grid benefits that we could leverage by providing the right programs or incentives for people to use these technologies in a way that benefits the distribution system. We already know that there are ways for them to benefit the energy supply system, the statewide grid as a whole. We know that demand response is a thing. We know that we can use these technologies for demand response, but understanding how they might be used for the distribution system, that's the focus of task 2. And I think it's meant to answer some really important questions that have been coming up from a lot of people, for quite some time now. So there's that aspect of these technologies where they can help the grid. And then there's the extent to which they can provide, I always make the distinction, I don't think it's a clear distinction, but I like to say reliability is when you recover from those everyday events, those everyday outages, and resiliency is when you have a way to provide yourself power or services or resources during a major emergency. And that's what task 3 is really focused on. These technologies, they'll probably have some grid impacts. They may have some grid benefits, and that's what we can look at in task 2. But in task 3, we know a lot of these technologies can be used to have some kind of resiliency benefit. And we want to understand what role the city could have. And there are a lot of different ways that you can approach this. You can look at community center resiliency. You can look at programs to have people install solar and storage in their homes. You can look at neighborhood microgrids. You can look at valuing resiliency in procurement. And there are a lot of other approaches too. Electric vehicle to home is another one. So we want to summarize these potential approaches in ways that not summarize, I'm not going to use that word just to avoid confusion with task 1, but we want to make a list of potential ways that the city could engage with the community and help the community in implementing these technologies to achieve greater resiliency. And we also want to be clear-eyed about what the costs and staffing needs would be to actually implement any of these programs. Task 3 does not presuppose we're actually going to do any of these projects. We just want to have a way for the commission and council to give policy direction on where they would like us to go and what resources we would need to go there.
So are you going to have pros and cons and recommendations regarding all the different technologies and what you could achieve with them?
I think pros and cons and trade-offs and resource needs. Whether we'll have recommendations, I think remains to be seen. We'll have to talk that through. But regardless, we want to put it on the table and give them those, give you all those policy options.
Okay, that's great. Thanks.
Thank you for this. One of my questions, thank you, Vice Chair Scharf, you asked a lot of the things that I was going to ask. And just to sort of on some level summarize, the output of the various tasks is reports, right? It's not decisions, it's not action. Each task force is going to go off and do a thing, and there will be a report.
I think that's a reasonable summary. I would say that task 2 is likely to have some findings or recommendations. Task 4 is likely to have some outcomes. We'll be reporting out on actions that we're taking and looking for feedback and on whether to adjust course on the actions we're taking. And task 3 will just be a report. Task 1 will just be a summary. But task 3 will be a report that the city could take action on.
Okay. Thank you. That is a helpful nuanced per task distinction. One of my questions is, so the SCAP, the council decided that reliability and resiliency strategic plan would be under the sort of purview of the UAC to, what's the word? Talk about. Is that the only topic? Or will you be coming back with, and now there's another part of the work plan that we want to run by the UAC?
Right now, so when we talk to you folks about grid modernization and the sort of related infrastructure tasks, some of the other infrastructure that we put in, like AMI, for example, has implications for building electrification. That's, I think, in line with what what council and the commission talked about on March 7th of last year in terms of having that role for the commission. I don't have anything additional from the work plan right now that I can confidently say we're bringing back, but I think in our planning exercises, we've acknowledged that there are topics that the commission needs to be looking at. One example is the SCAP funding study. It's a very broad-ranging study where we're trying to determine the costs of taking our electrification programs to scale, and it involves inputs that are infrastructure related around adapting the infrastructure, the cost of adapting the infrastructure to manage electrification. It involves the cost of the actual electrification measures, and it involves some strategies around how we deliver electric vehicle charging as well. And such a broad ranging study that I do believe that there has to be, number one, has to be some role for the commission in that one, and that it's interrelated with the reliability and resiliency strategic plan in some ways as well, because a lot of this EV infrastructure, for example, has implications for reliability and resiliency, and can be beneficial for the grid. So these topics are interrelated. I think we're still figuring out when is the right time and on which topics to come back to the UAC. But I think broadly, the oversight body for the work plan is largely the SCAP committee.
Great. It's good to have clarity. And speaking of clarity, So are the SCAP committees ongoing, especially the three that had strategically placed UAC commissioners on them?
The working group teams, that's where we had the commission members. The working group teams haven't been meeting separately, but they've been meeting as part of when we meet with the working group. We also include the folks who, I know it's a maze of.
Sorry, I said committee instead of
No,
working
it's a
group team,
complex
but honestly,
maze
it's a
of-
word salad to me.
It
The
is, I
question is
know.
just, is there still a thing that commission members are regularly involved in?
Well, when we have meetings with with all of the stakeholders who are part of the working group or the working group teams, I don't know how to say it any other way, unfortunately. And we do have those meetings. We had one just yesterday. We had one.
Here's the
last
context of
week,
my question.
And we are inviting the UAC commissioners to those.
I would like to, going forward, at the end of UAC meetings, put Vice Chair Scharf and Commissioner Metz on the spot every month and say, hey, can you fill us in on what happened on your SCAP activities this last month, if anything? And I wouldn't ask that if it's all in the rearview mirror and there's no ongoing activity.
It is
But if there's still
ongoing.
things,
Yes,
then
it's
I would
ongoing.
love Vice Chair Scharf and Commissioner Metz if we could get updates at whatever, that was the original intent, was that information flow would come back to the commission. And I think we would appreciate just knowing what group met and what they talked about. I mean, I'm talking like 30 seconds to a minute, nothing lengthy. I feel like that was whatever, one of the questions about communication. Otherwise, I'll wrap it up here. To your question about timeline, looks fine to me. It looks on the question of topics, they look quite reasonable. And as far as back to, why can't I find it on here? Anyway, I feel like at some point you asked, how does the UAC want to receive updates? A straw man suggestion would be when the report is written, it would be great to have an agenda item with the report in it and we get to talk about it.
Sounds good.
So, thank you.
Any other commissioner comments? I don't have much more to add at this point, but a couple questions. What's the percent of electricity that's used by commercial customers versus residential?
Yeah, it's about 80-20. It's a good
80 commercial?
80 commercial, 20 residential.
Okay, I remember it being more, but I didn't realize it was quite that skewed. And as we add these couple big commercial projects, is that factoring that in?
No, that's not factoring that in. So that'll shift. There's also some gray area in common areas in multifamily that's actually a good 5% or so. So depending on how you categorize that, it's another. So it's 80-20 is a good.
Anyway, the vast majority of the electricity is used on the commercial side. And it may just be because we do spend a lot of time at the UAC, maybe thinking more on the residential side. And so maybe I'm looking at these through UAC colored glasses, but I don't really see that much emphasis or on the commercial side. And it just seems to me that some opportunities that we don't want to miss out on, and to make sure we're thinking about that.
Yes.
And that also made me think about, I don't know, VMware, and if that, if there's anything there that would help provide, I don't know, input into the kind of topics or the angle that we'd want to think about.
No, I'm glad you asked about that, because I think resiliency, especially local solar and storage, is a topic that I think gets easier in some ways when you start looking at large sites. You noted VMware as an example. And so I think large commercial microgrids are a potential resiliency topic here too. And of course, they have value that goes even beyond, they have economic value that goes beyond just the resiliency benefits as well.
And I guess while you're saying that, I'm also conscious of not making our electrification or our grid improvements becoming a barrier to businesses here too. So I guess both
Yeah.
sides of that is important to think about. And then also on the economics, but very different, and this is just my inexperience. In terms of funding, I think we talked about a bond would fund this. And when in the process of evaluating these projects, do we start thinking about that? And how long does it take to actually get a bond?
Yeah, it takes some time, and we've been having talks about, how and when to do those bonds. I don't know the current status of those discussions. I know they're taking place. I don't know if we still have Dave or if there's anybody in the room who's willing to provide an update on that. Okay, we'll have to get back to you with an update on that one.
Yeah, any other questions or comments? Thank you so much for coming back to us. It's really helpful.
Thank you for having me.
Nice to see you here.
Can I ask
Sure.
another thing? I have this question that I keep writing down and I haven't asked it yet in any of our meetings, but is there a dashboard, like a dashboard of key metrics that you guys use in your meetings that could be shared with us? I'm always looking back at past SCAPS reports and being like, where are we now? And it's always in text and buried in some paragraph. And I'm wondering if there are any dashboards, and I have the same thought on the utility side too. I could imagine a dashboard that would be helpful for us to see, to just know kind of where are we against our plans.
Yeah, I'm a huge dashboard fan. We have different dashboards for different purposes. I think for the big picture that you're talking about, we're working on a KPI dashboard. So one thing you'll find if you go back through the Sustainability and Climate Action Plan is a list of KPIs in each of the sections. We're a little bit early in plan implementation to update those. Certainly they're broad enough that updating them monthly or even quarterly is a little bit difficult, but we're talking through how to get those KPIs out. I don't have anything that I can point you to right at this moment. But if you send questions with the types of data that you're looking for, I'm more than happy to pull what we have or let you know that it's not available yet.
That would be great. And if there is a
You got it.
dashboard that becomes kind of a standard, I don't know, if we don't need to see like every topic on here, but since there's a breakdown on the key, I don't know where I put my copy, but the key action items, they're the ones that are relevant to our commission, that maybe we could see the dashboards that have those metrics related to our work.
Yes. And which ones are you, so can you give me some examples of the
Well,
types of
so
things
the
you're thinking
key
about?
actions, sorry, let me just look and see. I printed out the SCAP key actions, and there's each segment, right? I think this is probably it. So there's, okay, so there's the energy climate action plan goals.
Yep.
So reduce greenhouse gas emissions from the direct use of natural gas in Palo Alto's building sector by at least 60% below 1990 levels. Modernize electric grid. Okay, so in each of these, then they break down, the energy section has like 2 pages of key actions. And I haven't looked at these to see which ones are quantifiable, but I'd love to see, these on a sheet.
Yeah.
Even so that you could just be like, well, where are we on each of these? So
that's what the KPI dashboard is meant to be. So I think there are some KPIs listed there. For example, I think number of homes without a gas connection is one of them. We also have EV or percent of new vehicle purchases that are electric. And those are part of the KPI dashboards that we're working on. Some of those, it's a little preliminary to report on. The number of homes with no gas connection, for example. I mean, we're very focused on heat pump water heaters, but not on complete electrification yet. So once we have some information to share on those, we'll share it out. But if there are areas you're particularly interested in, I may have data, or dashboards that I can provide that we already have created that I might be able to share with you.
I can come up with a suggestion for
thank you.
the kind of things I'm thinking of that I'm always looking for and kind of wondering where they are. So,
Okay, sounds good.
thanks.
Thank you. Okay, we can move on to commissioner comments and reports, which is the perfect opportunity to provide any feedback from any SCAP meetings. Were you there yesterday? Do you want to provide anything?
Well, in the, within the 30-second context, yes. The meeting mainly focused on marketing communication. And I think to the question that Commissioner Mauter raised before, there's really a great diversity of people on the SCAP team, but among the more technical people, I would say their expertise is more in end-use technology within the home. I can't think of anyone that really has deep expertise, Jim Stack, Lena Perkins kind of expertise on the utility side. I don't think there's anyone there like with that kind of knowledge. So the last discussion was really just on marketing, getting it out there and, convincing people.
Thanks. Any other commissioner comments?
So marketing the notion of electrification or marketing something specific, like a particular program?
There's priorities of programs like the heat pump, hot water heaters is, the first priority. And I think that was mainly it. I don't recall in depth. I think it was just sort of following the list of things that you would electrify. But there was no discussion about what to do about the grid or anything like that. There's a consultant who, is working on the marketing side. That was actually the main focus of the meeting, was that consultant was presenting what they're doing.
I've got a couple of questions. One is about early AMI adoption. I was contacted by an interested and active member of the community who had noted in one of our meetings that we had all said, hey, we want to be on the list for early AMI. And I'm delighted to report ours was installed recently. And this, he was wondering if he could get on the list of early adopters as well. Is there some way that members of the public can, or the Palo Alto community, customer community can be on a list to be among the early pilot folks?
I guess, yes. Again, it's limited around, what we can put out there for meter wise. Because, one of the things that we have discussed that we really want to see putting out onesie twosies across the community is probably not the best, because we really want to test if you put in 500 meters, can that collector really work? The consultants tell you yes, and everything is working well, but I think though that if there are some early adopters, yes, we can, if they send us an email that they would like to have a meter, I'm sure we can come up with a meter.
And us is, who do they send an email to?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, they can send an email to me
right.
directly. That's fine.
It's very kind of you to offer that.
Yeah, I can offer that up. And like I said, I can make that probably happen without going through a bunch of other people to try to get that done. So yeah, if they want to send an email to myself,
all right,
that would be great.
This is a perk of people who watch these meetings.
Yeah,
and stay
I know.
here
See,
till
that's the advantage.
9:30.
I was just going to say, with all the members.
That's it. That's it.
But I did have a back of room conversation earlier, and Jonathan just walked out, about the data being available to us. Just because you have a meter doesn't mean you're going to get the data until
that was my
sometime next
other
year. Is that
question.
right?
That was my other question as
Okay.
well, is when will that go live? do we have an idea?
No, we don't have an idea yet. I mean, that's going to be a little bit of time as we move forward. Dave, do you have some better information?
I can speak to that. Yeah, so we are working with SCW on developing the portal. So there are some efforts going between the MDMS and them. So right now it takes about 5 months of development once the functional specs are signed off. So we're maybe thinking February right now. But if there's some friendlies you guys want to pilot in the beginning, maybe early next year. So I'll keep you posted as we progress.
Thank you.
Okay. I also want to respond back to Chair Siegel's question earlier about funding. We are waiting to hear back from the DOE on the electrification grid, which we submitted for. I think it was for 115 million. So once we get their response is when we'll start the bond financing, because I think we had to spend those funds first before we can pursue bond. Okay.
So I have a question. And in the agenda for the August meeting, there was an item on natural gas hedging, and even a presentation. What happened to that item? Did it get re-agendized or?
Well, we were supposed to get a report back. It went to the finance committee because of the timing. So
Right.
but we're supposed to get a report back.
So what we're going to do is we're going to add it into the October meeting. Because we did get some feedback, we needed to make some changes from the finance group. So there's some changes before we're going to take it to council. So what thought was we'll bring it back and make it an informational, unless the commission would like to discuss it. But like I said, the finance has already kind of approved that portion and it's moving on to council. So.
And is there a recommendation from the staff on it?
There is.
Can I just stop? I
Because
don't
it's not
think, yeah,
agendized.
I
It's not
think we shouldn't,
agendized,
yeah.
but yes, there was a staff recommendation to them.
Yeah, I guess the question is if it's helpful for us, if there's something they're seeking feedback, then we could have it as an action item. If it's at this point past that, then
Yeah, I
an
think-
information item.
I
makes
think we're
sense.
past that because the whole thing was just around a timing issue. And that's the reason why the commission wasn't able to see it, because we had to cancel the meeting, because we needed to go to council to get an approval portion of it so that we can actually start hedging and looking at the hedging now. Otherwise, if we waited too long, then we won't be able to get any kind of pricing for the winter months. So that was the reason why we bypassed, unfortunately.
Thank you.
Any other future topics? I guess we can have an informational item on that one. Any other? Great. I think we can adjourn the meeting. Anyone want to move to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
Second. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.